I hit record on my end. Just let me know when you need permission.
Okay. I don't know if it's asking you anything. I just asked for it. Wait, what was that? Let me turn my notifications off. I can still see them. Okay.
All right. All right, ready when you are, Robert.
All right.
So do you want to discuss what we discussed originally about just like how you came up with the super gospel in general? I don't think anybody's ever heard that story before, though.
Yeah, I mean that's fine. Are we recording?
Yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. Well, I mean, what first gave me the idea was really just knowing that there was more to the Bible or whatever than we were told. Because again, as a Christian, I was reading the Bible and I kept coming across all these statements to books outside of the Bible. If you want to find out more about this, you can go read it in Book of Josh or or Gad the Seer or various other books. And as I was making my way through the New Testament, of course, I came across Jude, and I came across the attribution to Enoch. Didn't recognize it, so I went back to the link, and it took me back to Genesis instead of the Book of Enoch. And so that didn't seem like a satisfactory answer for that quotation. And so I looked through a few of the scholarly books that I had, and I came across a thing that basically nonchalantly cited from the non-canonical Book of Enoch 1:9, and then moved on as if that was like a satisfactory answer, which it wasn't. So I went down to the library at the time because there wasn't much in the way of there wasn't the internet back in the early 90s, which was when this was. I started getting curious about these books, and so I found out that there not only was there a Book of Enoch and that was a reference to it, but also that the book still existed and that it had been passed down in the Ethiopic canon along with several other books that were deemed heretical or non-canonical or whatever. So the first thing I went to do was to go down to a Christian bookstore and try to find it, which I couldn't. Then I had to order it, and then when I finally got it, I read it, and it just got me. I was so overwhelmed by what it had to say. Like, it was such a powerful teaching, and it just seemed like, wow, this is. It even said it was a book for the end of time, and back in the early '90s or whatever, there was still this notion that year 2000 or whatever was coming up, and I thought, well, how timely is this? That all of this. So I started getting into not only this book but also others, because again, at the end of the Book of Enoch 104, 105, it talks about that the scriptures will be given to the people and they will believe them and that you will teach them and that they will learn. What I'm saying? So I started getting interested in all these extra canonical books and I started reading them. I had already had a few books in my possession. Like at the time, another thing that happened to me uh, was that, like, I had been in a bookstore and I had been reading the book of Deuteronomy, and I was in a bookstore and I had picked up this book that said the lost books of the Bible, and I had opened up just exactly to the section that picked up where Deuteronomy had left off. I had left off in the book of Deuteronomy in that day, and so um, I thought, man, this is great. This was God talking to me. Why was he answering me out of this book? So that had happened prior to that as well. So, I just started getting this notion that these books were meant for the end of time, and that this was meant for public consumption, and that they were a gift. Enoch says that they are a reward upon this earth, and that we are to teach it to them with our wisdom. Right, that we who existed at the end of time, because again, he said that it was not for his time, but for a remote generation, which is going to be there at the removal of the wicked and the ungodly. And so anyway, so I was started reading the lost books of the Bible or whatever, and I started going back and forth because there were several different infancy gospels, for example. And I was like, well, let me put a bookmark over here. Let me go back and read what this said and what that said. And and so I was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between books. And it started to occur to me like, well, if these things are inspired, that you should be able to combine them, and so enough with all this back and forth. And so like I was telling you before, what I did was I took and made photocopies, because again, this was way before the age of the internet. So you could see how this is from one book, this is from another book, and et cetera. And I started putting them just kind of in a rough order, in a rough semblance of, sequence, just to kind of see if what I saw in book A matched what was in book C, matched what was in book D, whatever. It just it just started to occur to me that there was this feature among these works, that they were all coming from the same voice, that they were all spoken from the same prophet, that the word was unitary, that there was a property of God's word, that it was unitary. um and that really impressed me, because a lot of what scholars and Christians say, like, about the quote unquote synoptic gospels, is that they're conflations and accretions of different gospels that came before them, which again, I didn't really have a problem with that. In fact, it sort of bolstered my notion that you could take, like, even Luke even admits in his prologue, that many have taken in hand to write these things, that there's tons of these things floating around, and that he had compiled from this source and from another source and from another source. And if that book was canonical, it didn't strike me as particularly odd that a person would take and compile and order narratives in the same way that Luke basically said that he did, or said that he had in his prologue. And I felt like this was just what Luke was doing, and that this led to something that later became canonical. And as a matter of fact, he kept it, he brought it all the way into Acts, which is where he joined in with his own story that he was telling. uh you know and so this was very personally significant to him, and that was part of his journey, was after he had become a Christian, after he had whatever, that he felt like he needed to go back and put together the whole narrative of everything that had happened. And thank God that he did, because we have this really broad sense of early Christianity that we just wouldn't have anywhere else if it had not been for him doing that.
Right.
And I didn't have this grandiose sense at the time that that was what, quote unquote, I was doing. I was just trying to make sense of it and to see if that was the case with these books, because I had already accepted that that was the case with the canonical stuff. you know
Right. So, you mentioned in your previous videos before that something that I say all the time um, is that Jude was the half brother of Jesus, and they were older than even Mary, because they were from his previous marriage where he was widowed. And so
mhm.
it's interesting. You would expect that they would take him seriously, having sat at the dinner table with Jesus and spent time with Jesus, but they don't. And it's very sad, in my opinion, for the church, that not only do they not, give that any, I guess, credence, or say that he they give a lot of credit to Peter. No, I don't mean offense to Peter, but they give a lot of credit to Peter, who denied Christ 3 times. But Jude is aggressively defending Enoch as the righteous scribe. But yet so many people, and I don't know if this is because of ignorance, because there are witchcraft books that are that say Enoch on them, because that's Cain's Enoch.
Right.
Like, that's the firstborn son of Cain, which is the wheat and the tares. Like, even you wrote in your books, the Super Gospel, that to when Joseph comes back and he finds Mary pregnant, he thinks that what happened to Adam happened to him. So, not to push, the ideology of, the serpent seed, but I'm just saying it is clearly in the scriptures that that is what had happened. Even when you read about the patriarchs, it happened. So
Well,
all,
it
sorry, go ahead.
mhm. No, it states that categorically in First John, as well as the Gospel of Philip and several other places. It's heavily implied that
Right,
that's the case.
right.
And I mean, the very fact that it's in the canonical scriptures kind of ices it. The very fact that it says that it's something that is canonical, people should agree on it.
Right.
The okay, big picture here.
Right.
If a Christian becomes a Christian through, say, conversion or through some inner calling where they feel like they are led. Um, the the idea is that truth, that God is truth, first off, and that truth is what should be followed. In fact, it says in the scriptures, let God be true and every man a liar.
Right.
And that was very real to me because, like we talked about earlier, I was very sort of cynical and hard bitten as a convert from atheism.
Right.
I was always very cynical about Christianity and Christians in general. Now, when I had converted, I had to eat a lot of humble pie because, I was very vociferous and out there about Christianity and atheism, and with my atheism, because
Right.
partly because of these reasons. One experience I had was when I was in college. I was with a roommate who was a Catholic, and one day he had the only Bible that was in the room, and I was arguing with people, and so I just sort of grabbed his Bible without his permission and started reading through it, trying to get like arguments against these people that I was talking to. And it occurred to me that as I was trying to look where books were, it was like, what's this book, the Maccabees? What's this book, Judah? I never heard of any of this stuff, right? And so I was like, wait a minute, what's all this? And so I asked him, and then he's like, oh yeah, I'm a Catholic and we have more books in our Bible. And I was just sort of like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There is no such thing as the Bible, right? Where does that come from? How did I go my whole life without hearing this, right? Because where I grew up, I mean, my immediate environment, my mother was a sort of atheistic and agnostic, whatever. She was very non-committal about it, but she didn't like Christians and Christianity and whatever because various reasons. But people she knew were hypocrites, and she would always judge Christianity by that. And it was easy for me to just listen to her, what she had to say, and yeah, they're like that. I see that. I get that. You know what I'm saying? And so I was sort of very hard bitten at the time. So when I came to Christianity, I thought, okay, first of all, God had led me to this in a very personalistic way. Like I said, there were things that had happened to me that, being a rational person, I thought defied a certain level of rationality. And I thought, oh, well, he's trying to talk to me now, isn't he? He's trying to reach me through something that I would respond to, in my own way or whatever. And so, again, when I converted or whatever, when I finally came to the conclusion that there was a God, and this is an interesting story too, because there were other sort of coincidences. I don't mean to get off topic, but I can remember my first experience was religion. I had this bus driver. I was riding back and forth to school. I didn't have a car because I didn't have a lot of money. I grew up in a fatherless environment, that kind of thing. So I was like riding the bus or whatever, and our bus driver for years and years was this guy named Michael Alexander, who was not like, I don't know if he was a preacher or not. I never asked him, but all I know is that he preached to us. And we were on the bus, and this was a bit different day and age because this was back in the 1980s, right?
Right.
When you could talk about anything, it didn't matter. There was no filter on anybody or anything. It was a time when, for better or worse, like it or not, you could say whatever you wanted. And there was no taboo against him speaking to us about religion or whatever, at least none that he seemed worried about. Because he would say, we'd always kind of make fun of him too, because he'd just start talking to us just out of the blue. He's like, whoever says that there is no God, is a fool. And he would say stuff like that to us. And we would always sort of chime back at him like, preach, brother, teach, you know what I'm saying? It was an odd dynamic, but the guy's name was Michael Alexander. And the weird thing was, I was always the very last stop on my bus route. I was always the very last stop. He went to this middle school that was out in front of these apartments that I lived in. And so I would be the last to get off. And so there were times when I just would let everybody get off and I would start arguing with the guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I never persuaded him, of course, right? But he was like this like Caribbean guy. He was a Black Caribbean preacher kind of guy who had come to America or whatever. He had a very thick sort of Caribbean accent, and he was just very adamant about it. He just was very convicted about it, and I almost felt bad reaming him about it because he seemed like such a sincere kind of guy, right? That I actually cut him a lot of slack, and talked to him like like a real person,
Right.
just because I had some level of respect for the guy because he really believed what he believed. And anyway, so time passed, and I had another sort of odd coincidence where where uh, where this person that I had known back when I was in middle school, and I had moved around quite a bit, and I called him up just out of the blue one day, and it turned out that the day before he had died, and I spoke to his mother, and she was very upset, and I thought that's very weird. I hadn't talked to this guy in years, and all of a sudden I call him up, and he had died the day before, and I didn't even know why I called him. There's just was something just inside of me is like, I remember that number. Let me reach out to him. I wasn't, it just was very random.
Did
And
that did
then
that trigger did that trigger something, do you think? Because you being an atheist, maybe we're starting to think of life and death, sort of, or was that kind of a play on it, or no, do you think?
well, no, it freaked me out. It really did, because
Right.
even as an atheist, I thought, okay, let's just do the math. Okay, I hadn't talked to him in 2 years. That's like what, 700 days. So that's like maybe 1 in 700 odds or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I was just trying to
Right.
think about it rationally.
Yeah.
And then I went to his funeral the next day or whatever, and people were saying all kinds of things like, oh, he must have reached out to you, or something must have put it in your spirit or whatever. People were saying that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that too. I was like, that's really kind of freaky. You know what I'm saying? For somebody who professed all that, and at the time I was still talking to Michael, you know what I'm saying, from time to time on the bus and everything. So it did kind of freak me out.
Right.
And when it finally came down to it, one of my first jobs, I was working in the mall, in the Galleria in Houston. And one of the guys I work with, I kid you not, was a preacher, a black preacher from the Caribbean named Michael Alexander.
Wow.
And that freaked me out. That was like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me, right? Because it was just slapping me in the face,
Right.
and as a rational person, I thought, there's no way, this is impossible, right? And so I finally started like talking to the guy, and we talked about all the same stuff that the other Michael Alexander and I had talked about. You know what I'm saying? And they were like in vast agreement. And then he started telling me, listen, you got to bend your knee. You got to eat a little humble pie. You know what I'm saying? He was telling me that I needed to change on the, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I felt like, you know what? I give up, and those are just a couple of examples. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? There were tons of other things I could go on about, and I thought, well, okay. They had always told me that God would meet us where we were. And he's very personalistic, and he's very, he treated us all, like he knew us all, and he's, you know what I'm saying? And so I
Yeah.
thought this was a very common thing. This must be what people talked about when they talked about their conversion experience. It always seemed like, yeah, this is what people mean when they say that God works in your life. And you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it seemed very real to me at the time. So I was very like sincere type Christian. I came into this like really believing it now at that point,
Right.
because he had overcome, let's say, all of my objections, you know what I'm saying,
Right.
about it, my rational objections. And so I started getting involved with the church, and reading the Bible and everything. I started reading the Bible, and like I said, I started coming across all of these statements that referred to books outside of the Bible, and it sort of kept going through my mind because of the experience I had with my roommate, where I had been broadsided with this knowledge that I thought everybody should know this, right? Why doesn't everybody in the world know this? Like, you could go up to people and say, did you know that there's different canons? And yeah, some of them will know, but a lot of people might be 20, 30, 40 years old, and they might not even know, like, what do you
Right.
mean? What
Right.
I thought a Catholic was a Catholic and a Baptist was a Baptist, and whatever, I'm saying, like, as if they all had the Bible. In fact, when they say the Bible, it almost sounds like there is nothing else. There is this, and that's it. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? When people say
Exactly.
that. So like psychologically, you think it's just one thing. But it started dawning on me that, well, nobody's quoting from this book over here, and we don't have it anymore. Why did they throw it out? Why did they get rid of it? Why can't I go read this again? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And it kind of made me mad. And when I finally got all the way to Jude, and there was that extra canonical reference, there was something I could go read. There was
Right.
something I looked into it, and there was something I could go look into. Right. And so I was excited. I was like, wow, this is great. So I'm going to go and I'm going to look into what this book had to say. And of course, the first thing it says is that, that is for the end times. This is the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous who will be living in the day of tribulation, when the wicked and the godless are to be removed.
Right.
Right. And I hadn't heard about the tribulation. Everybody had heard about the tribulation. I mean, back in the 90s, everybody was thinking year 2000, that's it, right? I mean, even like that song, 2000, the party's over. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. I mean, that was just a common notion at the time that the clock was ticking.
Sure.
And so I started thinking to myself, well, okay, like God had really lit a fire under me, so to speak, and got me off, my atheism thing and into this other thing. And then all of these realizations, like there was no such thing as the Bible, and there was no authoritative anything really. And it caused me to really question.
That's what happened to Paul, though, is he went from being a scholar of the Jews to be and killing Christians to being, not that you were killing Christians, but I'm saying you literally had a Paul road moment where you went from being totally like against something to totally into it, and not only into it, but like I said before, putting the stripes back on Christ, who's the word of God, by putting all those pieces together when there wasn't even a way to do it. You had to print it out and cut and paste it on paper to do it. That's crazy.
Well, listen, I mean, I was, the thing was, I had an awakening. It's like, I knew there was something wrong. It's like, there's something wrong. It just, right. There were a couple of reasons. Number one, just the sheer audacity that there's this book that's good enough for Jude to write about, and good enough. And the way it's broken down, and this is what, again, as a rational person, as a person who sees every word and thinks, what does that word mean? What is this? Why is that word used and then that word? I'm saying, why was there a logic to it? What he was saying when he said Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these, or even to these, as some of these things say. And then they give the quote, right?
Right.
Well, the idea is that the first word Enoch there makes reference to the fact that that's the source of the book. So he cites the source. Right, you just write that over in the margins. He's writing the source of the book. The seventh from Adam. He gives him his antiquity. Write that in the margin. The seventh from Adam, from that long ago in Jude's mind. Right. And then prophesied. Hello, prophet. He's a prophet. Right. Yeah. Write that in the margins. So we have the source. We have the antiquity. We have the title that he is a prophet. And they have the quote, which matches the quote that's over here in the book of Enoch that I was reading, that made it all the way to my day. Now, if this book says that it's for the end times, and there it is at the end times, and there you have in the canonical readings, the one that everybody's supposed to agree as truth, you have just a series of facts. I'm citing you the source. I'm giving you its antiquity. I'm telling you that it's prophetic. And look, you can check and see this is the one I'm talking about.
Right.
Right. Why does he answer all of those questions just in rapid succession? That is a way to get that book back into Christendom and into the world. That is an open door. And I knew that immediately. I thought, oh my God. And this was way back in the early 90s, that I just realized that this was true. So like I said, it happened kind of almost all of a sudden to where I was like leaning towards it, thinking about it, to where it just dawned on me that Christianity had to be wrong the way that it was. It had to be. There's something fundamentally.
You must have felt like you found buried treasure in a sense, which fulfilled all those metaphors and the parables in the Bible, though, because nobody else had that info at the time. I don't know anyone, even if you go back in time, there's nobody that was talking about that. And even to this day, you sort of sparked something that's kind of, opened up the gates, if you will, because and I know you're a humble person, so I'm not saying this to, build you up or, make your head swell or anything. I'm just saying it's true, because if you look back, there was nothing that has been made like this. There is nothing else that is the same as the super gospel. There's nothing that combines it all like that. And even for instance, we call ourselves born again Christians. How do we have that born again word? It's from Nicodemus. So Nicodemus, that whole story of Jesus going to the underworld fulfills Revelation 1:18, where did Jesus get the keys of hell and death? Why did he have to come here and die on the cross for us to get the freedom of hell and death? And it also fulfills the prophecy of the 5,500 years that he gave to Adam when he was dying, and Seth and Eve went to the garden to get the ointment to heal him. So it fulfills multiple prophecies in one book, and nobody has that. You know what I'm saying? You put it all for everybody to read it at once, and then did the audio, then did the voices for all the characters. I mean, it's ridiculous, Robert. It's ridiculous. I'm just saying, there's nothing out there like that.
Well, again, it's the whole thing was look. The whole thing was, like I was showing you before. It all started out as just me trying to see how far this would go, and then I would just keep going, right?
Right.
You know, I would follow this path until it led to some kind of major problem, this major contradiction, you know, something. I thought surely if this thing were false, it would fail,
Right.
right? I thought surely I'd run into something that made it impossible for me to continue. But I never really ran into it. That isn't to say that there aren't some rough patches, but if you think about it, I try to weigh things on an equal balance.
Right.
If somebody says over here in the canonical books, we have difficulties with numbers, one angel versus two angels, or we have discrepancies of that sort, right? If that's acceptable with the canonical stuff, then those similar kinds of issues have to be acceptable with the apocryphal stuff, right?
Yep.
Because he doesn't want us holding different weights and different measures. No righteous God would do that. You know, no God of truth would want us to hold a double standard, right? And so I would just try to find the marriage, if you will. It can be this and that. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be this or that. And so
I'm
with
sure
the
that, I'm sure that people on your show and my show, my channel and your channel, both know the super gospel at least fairly well. But for the people that don't know the super gospel at all, there's a completion of the infancy gospels to where we know exactly what happened to Christ before he was 12, which is all you get in the canon. You also get, if you go and you Google search right now, the punishments of hell, all you get is Dante's Inferno and stuff like that, which is not exactly the scriptural parts that you put in, because people don't know what the punishments for abortion are. They don't know what the punishments are for blasphemy, or all that, are not even being kind to your parents, which is one of the 10 commandments. So I mean, that's just a full, from the grandparents of Jesus, which is Mary's parents, all the way to Jesus rising back up into heaven and the underworld. I mean, there's nothing that complete. And that's what I really feel like, that's what we need. And it said in Enoch, like you said, that it was prophesied to be that way. So it's just amazing that we're having this discussion even in this late hour. It's just nuts.
Well, it's amazing that it's left to us, but if you think about it, you go back to Enoch, what it says, that it's a book not for his generation, but for a remote one. It says that which is for to come concerning the elect, right? It's for a time in the future. Time has taught me a lot of things. Getting into the word has taught me a lot of things. You know, I'm like I said, I'm sort of private, introverted by nature. I'm sort of happy just going around in my own circles and finding things, but that's worked for me. I've sought and I have found, you know, and for me, I share everything that I know to the best of my ability. I take something and I try to see it as clearly as I possibly can. And then I try to put things next to each other that belong next to each other. And just something about me wants to find the commonalities, and something about it says that it's all unitary, the unitary knowledge. And a lot of things started to happen as I was doing this. Like I started understanding things, like understanding parables, like things would just, I hate to say pop into my head. I would just be, or put two and two together, but just, I would come to realizations. I would just know things like I would just understand keys and things that unlock the scriptures, because I just listened to them and listened to them and listened to them. And I went over these texts over and over and over again. And as that started to happen, my eyes started to open about a lot of things, knowing the mystery, because this is a key that unlocks pretty much every door.
I know it happened to me
This
too.
key.
It happened by listening to your work. It happened to me too, especially with the two stones when Satan's tempting Jesus, and he says, take these two stones and make them bread. And then you realize that the two stones are like the Old and New Testament. But Jesus said, man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So he's telling Satan, I'm not doing this right now. You're going to have to wait, and I'm going to allow it to be for a time in the future, like Enoch said, where the elect and righteous will understand all these things and preach it to the world, basically. And there's more people now alive than ever have been. So it's really for our time.
Well, it's everything that it says about it. It's lost and found. It's old and new, right? These are not paradoxical. The scriptures themselves are old, but they're new to us. And they're also understood in a new way. The thing about the keys was that was something that I started with I started kind of piecing together the gospel at about the same time that I put together what I call the guidebook for the elect. It was a series of several
Yeah, I love that series.
treatises that I was writing at the time. Again, this was before I had a computer, and what I did was I had a typewriter set up on my counter, and I just sort of walked around, and every once in a while I'd go back to my typewriter and I'd write something out.
Wow.
And it just the way that for those of you who don't know what that is, that was like where I sort of came across what I call the Peter principle, recognizing that everything is parabolic. Even the narratives of the scriptures contain parabolic meanings and parabolic understandings, and that whatever it was saying on the level of the physical, it meant something else on the level of the parable, like what you were talking about earlier with the Acts of John. I had intuited, before I ever read the Acts of John, I had intuited that not only was Jesus the Word of God, or the Logos, but that his death on the cross was symbolic of the death of the Logos, and that his being buried underneath the earth, let's say, was parabolically related to the idea that the earthly terms cover up a heavenly meaning, so to speak, that the Logos is in effect covered by the earth. It means that the level of the flesh, or the veneer of the flesh, or whatever, is the thing that blinds us to the spiritual nature that lies within it. So that his death as a human was real, but it carried with it the notion of the death of the Logos, that the burial of the human was real, and the resurrection of the human was real. But the reason why he had to do those things was because the Logos was also going to spiritually die. Like even the Bible talks about in Revelation that I will kill the children of Jezebel with death. Right?
Yep.
That sounds redundant. Like, I'm going to kill you with death. What do you mean? Are you killing everything that's dead? Because he's speaking metaphorically. Death is a state of not knowing. Life is the state of knowing. There's this tremendous duality, and this is what I love about like the Gospel of Thomas. And sorry if I'm rambling. All of this stuff relates to all of this other stuff. You can't almost help but ramble. The idea that because it all is the same keys, it's all the same codes. You see about life and death. Life is spiritual life. Death is spiritual death. You have the physical level and you have the spiritual level. So every time you see a physical blindness, there's a spiritual blindness, is what is essentially meant. Right. Whenever there's a physical deafness, there is a spiritual deafness that is meant. And that's one of the easiest keys in the whole world to learn. You could unlock the whole Bible just knowing that one thing. Right. When Jesus or Yeshua, the physical man, opens up somebody's physical eyes, then that means that the Logos, which is the meaning that's ascribed to the man, is opening up this person's spiritual eyes. And so that man is elevated from just a man to representing all men, or all of mankind. This is so, in other words, it's not isolated to him just doing one thing to one person or a series of people. It's about what he's going to do to us in our spiritual state. He's going to bring us from death to life. Now, when he says that he killed the children of Jezebel with death, it means that the entire church age was dead. Like what I was just telling you about before. Like, why do people nitpick over things like canon or denominations when they're all wrong, when they're all demonstrably wrong? You could pick and choose and say, maybe out of all this, maybe one is legit, but you can't even do that.
Well, you know how you said that you read the Wizard of Oz, and that helped you understand that the metaphoric nature of the Gospels and stuff like that. Like, for instance, I refer to like the Lord of the Rings. It's almost like all the different books or parts of the books, the important parts were given to different races, almost like, which represents denominations. So it's interesting that he's the Lord of the Rings, but then it's given to each one. It's almost like the devil has the power to like distribute it to all these different people that have different parts of it, but you need to bring it back to the one true faith that we're supposed to be fighting for. You know what I mean?
Well, that harkens back to another one of my experiences. Like I said, I've got dozens of things that played into this, but that was one of them. And since you bring it up, let me kind of explain to people who don't know. There's a writer called Cecil Adams that I was really, really into back when I was in high school. And he was a writer for the Chicago Reader, and he would answer just the most bizarre and off the wall questions that people would get him. He seemed like the kind of person who just knew everything, right? And so I was fascinated to read his little articles. But he put out these series of books called The Straight Dope. That was the name of his column, was The Straight Dope with Cecil Adams or whatever. And
Yeah.
one of these chapters in one of these books was about the Wizard of Oz as an allegory.
Yeah.
And somebody who was in high school at the time, I was reading literature, but I was reading things like, Shakespeare and Pride and Prejudice and whatever, but it was interesting to me to read something that was allegorical, because I hadn't read anything like that in school anyway, at least as far as I knew, that was purely allegorical.
Right.
And so the idea was that, I'm going to go back and exposit that, because I think a lot of people will find it interesting in and of itself, but it provides a really apt analogy, which is great, because you could take from one and gather that, and then you could apply it to the biblical and see where I'm coming from on this. But the idea was that, okay, everybody knows the story of the Wizard of Oz, but okay, so let's just start with the characters. Okay, so each particular character in the Wizard of Oz, according to this theory anyway, and a little bit of background too, is written by this guy named L. Frank Baum, who was a quote unquote progressive living back in the 1890s. And it was an allegory supposedly about the idea that if you, instead of having the gold standard, you had the silver standard, because there's more silver than there is gold, right? That would just magnify the amount of wealth that we had in our coffers, that would make money and wealth more readily available. And that, because he was progressive or whatever, the idea was that more wealth for everybody meant that everybody would do better. And so the idea is he had this political bent to him when he wrote these children's stories. So he couched all of these political ideas into a children's story, what amounted to a children's story. But in a way it was a little bit subversive. But anyway, again, to make a long story short, or try, the idea was that you had different characters. You had the Cowardly Lion, you had Dorothy, of course, you had the Tin Man, and you had the Scarecrow, and you had the Wizard, and the different places, like for example the Emerald City or whatever. So what this all broke down to was, okay, Dorothy kind of represented Americans or whatever in general. She was on a journey, let's say, from Kansas to Oz, which metaphorically, allegorically, was supposed to be Washington, D.C. That was where El Presidente lived or whatever. That was where the wizard lived, right? The idea was the wizard was the president, that Oz was Washington, D.C., that Dorothy was just your average American citizen or whatever, trying to make it through the journey or whatever, through life or whatever. And that when she gets to I should say Oz is a metaphor for America, and the Emerald City is Washington, D.C. specifically. Right. But that the idea was that she was led to follow, quote unquote, the yellow brick road, right, which represented the gold standard. And all of these munchkins, or mental midgets, in other words, were the ones who were promoting the gold standard, right? The idea that everybody told her the same thing, and everybody told her, look, just follow it, just follow it, or whatever. And the idea was that in the movie, they had made her slippers into ruby slippers. And this is what throws a monkey wrench into people's, everyday understanding of it. In the book, her shoes were silver, right? And so the idea was that this was a metaphor about the silver slippers, right, being the silver standard, right, and the yellow brick road being the gold standard, right? And so the idea was that the whole time she's walking the yellow brick road or whatever, the answer is right there at her feet, that she has the silver at her feet, that's the real key, right? And all she had to do was, click her heels or whatever, and she had it all along or whatever. That's supposed to be the political allegorical meaning of it. And all along the way, she meets different people and different obstacles, such as the Scarecrow, representing the American farmer. And the American farmer was thought of as being kind of dumb. Some progressives these days still consider the farmers to be kind of dumb when they're not. They're the ones who do have a brain. They know what it takes to, you know, farm and to perform agriculture. And it's not easy, and it's not for people who aren't smart. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Or as she runs into the Tin Man, the Tin Man represented the victim, if you will, of the Industrial Revolution, who worked, but who didn't, you know, who was being made into a robot or into something mechanical and
Right.
not something real. And he
Well,
was in
that
search.
stuff's happening right now. I mean, they're making people heartless and stuff. It's actually happening,
Yeah.
real life. So
And so the idea, but I mean, just in keeping with what an allegory is and why it is that I could now see the scriptures kind of in those terms, was because I had been reading that book and I came across that understanding. I thought it was fascinating because the way
right.
the story plays out, since I started, I might as well try to finish it anyway. The idea was that she then runs into the cowardly lion or whatever, who represented the cowardly sort of politician, you know,
Yep.
and the explanation was, I think, that was specific to William Jennings Bryan, who was a you know, a figure at the time who was a populist, I believe, but somebody who really did have courage in the end or whatever. You know, just the idea that the Wicked Witch of the West, that she represented the western part of the Americas, right,
Mhm.
which was dry and which was subdued with water, right?
Right.
And not to be crass, but you got to remember this is the 1890s, that the flying monkeys represented the Plains Indians and
Yep.
all of this other, and that they were part of the West. And you know what I'm saying, it was all metaphorical. And that when
Right.
she got to the Emerald City at long last, it was emerald because everything was about money, and that people were bought off or whatever with money. And actually in the book, it's interesting because they wore spectacles, and in the book the spectacles were green, so they saw
Uh,
everything through the lens of money,
right.
right? And so in other words, you could take something that seemed like an allegorical, like children's fairy tale or whatever, but it might be written with a higher level in meaning.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that in the end, all she had to do is click her heels, and the answer was silver all along, right? So some of that gets lost in translation because the movie doesn't follow the book
Right.
precisely. But everybody's so familiar with the book, if you just make a couple of mental changes, it's like, oh yeah, now it makes sense,
Sure.
right? So you start reading the scriptures like that. If Jesus is the logos, let's say, that's just like the Tin Man being the, you know, the person who's being turned into a machine, or the Scarecrow being mischaracterized as somebody. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's just you're ascribing a meaning to a word, and then you're understanding it with that word in mind,
Right.
right?
Like you said, it's like spiritual algebra.
Yeah, it's like algebraic. Yeah, if X is this, then Y is that. You know what I'm saying? And you work these things out because it's algebraic. And now what I feel like I'm able to bring to people, and what I
Mhm.
hope I'm bringing to people, is the notion that you can see beyond the surface level of everything, that there is a deeper, far more important meaning in everything that you're reading, and that it pertains to our time, and that it's also there for us at the end as a gift,
Right. Right. Jesus.
as
Right.
a tool, if you will, to take off these blinders that we have, that we believe in, the teachings that are rooted in Christianity. Now, I have to be very careful here. The Bible is, what I'm saying, is true. Let God be true and every man a liar.
Right.
There's nothing really that I question about it. There are variants in manuscripts, I know. There are variants in canons, I know. The idea, though, is that as a whole, it's literally, very literally, the word of God, and very literally is our salvation. And it does lead to these higher levels of understanding, which, if understood properly, right, will allow us to take off these blinders, like I said, that we have about the past, the things that we've been taught, because some realization takes place within us that they're not true,
Right.
and that you're waking up from an illusion. Like it says in the Gospel of Truth, it's like a person waking up from a dream. It's like they just know that they're in a different world. You know, you
Right.
might say they're not in Kansas anymore. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? They're
Oh man,
literally in
it's
a
like
whole
waking up
other
from
new world.
yeah.
Yeah, and we had to walk all this way, in a sense, to just get back to where we were at the beginning, to get to those realizations, because the idea was that there were things that were encoded for us to decode at some future time, just like the book of Enoch says about itself, not for his generation, but for a remote generation, right? So if something is written for a generation, but not the present generation, you have to hide it in such a way that the present generation doesn't see it or have it, and reveal it in such a way that the future generation can pull it out and say, here it is.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that's
it
what
was like, you said it was like written in code. So it's almost like you said, I say this on my channel, quoting you all the time, is that the only thing that you can trust an untrustworthy person to do is to betray your trust. So if you know that they're going to betray your trust, and that's mankind in general, because what he says to one, he says to all, then you have to protect it in code. And that's why you were able to combine Second Peter with Jude to create that third text, is because they did it on purpose to protect those things which were meant for us to have in this time.
They used all manner of, I hate to use the word techniques, but just for simplicity's sake.
Right.
The idea that Jude and Peter, Second Peter, for example, for those of you who don't know, you can take the book of Jude, and I've done it on my channel. I've got a video of this up where I've taken Jude and Second Peter and conflated the two. The idea is that it's kind of like if you were to take a letter or something and rip it apart. You know, you see this in movies and stuff like that. You see where somebody's got one half of a letter and another person's got another half of the letter, and when you put them together, then they can figure out, you know, what it all means or something.
It's actually in the movie Tintin. He has 3 different scrolls that are inside of a ship called the Unicorn, which is kind of funny. Almost, I swear they put it in the movie on purpose, but in the mast of the ship is 3 letters, and when you put them all together, it forms a complete text. And so, and it only shows through sunlight coming through. And at the end of the movie, they find a treasure, and John of Patmos is the one that's holding the keys to the treasure. So it's very metaphorical in itself.
Yeah, that's far out. I'll have to look into that. I've never seen that. But I mean, it's very much like that. That's the thing. You're putting 2 and 2 together, and you're seeing something that transcends what you had before. The idea that they took and okay, so let me back up here, because there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I could talk for days and days and weeks if I wanted to. I try not to repeat myself too much, but the idea is that Second Peter and Jude, and you have to look at these 2 books. These books are so literarily connected that even regular scholar, like if you go to like find notes, like for example, if you go to a Christian bookstore and you find these books where you have like, this is a book about First Peter, this is a book about Second Peter, this is a book about, you know, the letters of John or something. Most of the time when you go in there, you see Second Peter and Jude in the same volume.
Right.
Or, you know, I mean, I've seen that a number of times.
It's in the Dartmouth Bible. They wrote it in 1950 or something. They took out that's the one I sent you about all the, they took out the Enoch lines, and the ones about in Jude, they took out the fallen angel lines. In that, they have Second Peter and Jude next to each other, which is the way it should be, but they took the lines out. So it's like, you can't even see it if you wanted to.
But that's amazing that anyone would even think to do that. I mean, I can understand people. Okay, I can understand people who they start out with a certain postulate, and their postulate is that this book gained accretions over time, that something was added to it, right? And so they think that subtracting from that gets you closer to what the original book was. So the idea that Jude, without any of these extra canonical references, is closer to what the Jude actually wrote, right? And that some person came in and corrupted Jude, which is the notion that they would leave you with. They've done this with the Bible Project too, I think is what it was called, where they went through the sayings of Jesus and they said, well, he probably said this, could have said that, probably didn't say this, and for sure didn't say that. You know what I'm saying? They color coded it so that a person reading it.
They should probably be careful with that, because Revelation says the people that do that get the plagues of Egypt or whatever, you know, like, you know. So
well, but I'm just saying, they start with this certain postulate that God's word is been tampered with or misrepresents. So that's not where I'm coming from at all. And most people who I believe are simple Christians with the mind of a child aren't
Right.
going to come at you with the notion that that there are all these additions and that they're false. My thought is that um, there are probably additions in the sense that, like, for example, you have the Alexandrian texts, and then you have the Textus Receptus, for example, and there's a ton more verses in the Textus Receptus than there are in the Alexandrian manuscripts.
Right.
And people will insist that the Alexandrian manuscripts are the older of the two, and that the what we base the King James on, for example, the Textus Receptus, for example, is full of accretions and other kinds of insertions and whatnot.
Right.
Those kinds of things, this is one of those chicken or egg kind of things, you got to look at. I think even if there were accretions or whatever, they probably came from reliable sources that were being lost and
Mhm.
brought over, because like example, you take Matthew and you take Luke and you put them together, and sometimes you'll get places where Matthew says this but Luke doesn't, or Luke says this but Matthew doesn't. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? There's a
Like
little they're
the holidays,
overlapping.
like the holidays you said that are celebrated every year, but they act like it was wrong because they don't realize that it was celebrated every year. So it seems like a contradiction, but it's not. It's just that it was something that happened like
Yeah,
over and
like
over
with
again.
Anna and Joachim. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that. Exactly. But the idea here is that I don't like, or exactly, or even the endings to Mark, for example. And
Mhm.
there's several different ascensions of that, where Mark has a sudden ending where the ladies at the tomb took off scared, and then it ends there. And then there's a slightly longer ending, and then there's this one that's from the Freerlogian, which
Yeah.
is longer still. And what they say is that that's an extension or expansion or whatever, and that you shouldn't trust it. But what it probably is was an ending that was taken from another gospel and put on it. But I mean, the thing is, you have all these variants. So how do you know and how do you trust? The idea, though, is that Jude never was passed down to us in any other form, really, than the form that had all of those things in it.
Right.
And the idea is that we're not really supposed to be questioning God's word. The idea of the super gospel, I put everything in there that was there. The idea was that whatever was available needed to be put into it, just as if it were supposed to be there, because everybody added a piece. And what I was demonstrating through that, or what was being revealed to me anyway through that, was the idea that everything bore upon it, that everything had its place in the whole, and that the truth of the logos, like if I pointed out Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which one's the true one? That's
They're just
kind of a
different.
loaded
They're,
question.
they're different points of view. It's vantage points. So it's whatever the vantage point was of the person that wrote it, or whoever gave them to write it down, or whatever, if it's not a first-hand account or something. So for instance, I'll give you a for instance. In your super gospel, I read the entire Gospel of Nicodemus portion with the Dissensus Latin A, Latin B, and all that stuff. But then I added the Gospel of Gamaliel because Gamaliel had his own perspective of what happened. So it added even more depth to the super gospel. See what I'm saying? So
Yeah, so you end up getting more out of it as
right,
you
right,
do it.
right. So
And
and
another
people
thing,
love that you can see that in depth, because when somebody loves Jesus, they want to hear those stories about what happened right before and right after these things that are in the canon. You know what I mean? And people that just offhandedly dismiss it, they really don't want to investigate it. And according to Solomon, that's folly, is to dismiss something without investigating it
well,
first.
and also what happens is, okay, every story has beginnings and middles and ends and different acts or whatever all in between it. What would happen was a story would bring up a theme or a storyline, and
Mhm.
another book would carry on the theme or carry on the storyline, and then another book would carry on the theme and then carry on the storyline, such that by the time you got to the end, you had this person over here referring to what this person over here said in a way that makes sense when you read it all in a linear fashion. Like
Right.
when you read, for example, in the infancy narratives, right? I took from the ascension of Isaiah, where Yeshua passed down through all of the heavens,
Right. I
right?
use that all the time on my channel. Yeah.
And the idea was, okay, so you had this whole continuation where the heavens froze. That was from one source. He comes down from heaven. That's another source. And in that entire section, there's got to be 14, 15 different references. I haven't counted them out, but that's a combination of a whole bunch of different sources. And there's
Right.
probably sources that could be added into it. I didn't want to make this thing super bloated, but I used everything that I had at the time, or everything I could find at the time, to do it. And it's
Right.
something that could be probably infinitely expanded as we find more text or whatever. But the idea was that even though it came from all these sources, everybody added a piece, and their piece fit the other
Right.
pieces. It made sense.
That's what's freaky, is that it all fits. And if you read it without the glossary, you would never know it's not all combined different pieces. You know what I'm
So
saying?
it's a different way of knowing, I guess, is what I'm saying. The common way of knowing is that you go to a church and you learn from your pastors and you learn from your leaders and stuff. But like I said before, I had awakened. I had come to this realization that there was nothing that they could really teach me about the path that I was on.
Right.
There was nothing that, and this was really nothing against them, but it's the old blind leading the blind thing. You know, why am I going to bend the knee to some tradition or some church or something that's going to tell me this, that, and the other, when I already know there's things that are very fundamental that they're wrong about.
Right. Well,
Things that are very fundamentally wrong. And that's the idea.
Direct revelation. Like you said, by doing this, it was direct revelation. It wasn't going through a person. It was going right to God, which is the word of God, which is what you did.
It is, and it continues to be. That's the thing. It's the proverbial gift that keeps on giving. It just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Right. And once you find it, you want to give it to other people, because it's that brotherhood and sisterhood that you mentioned with Carol, is that you want to give it to other people because it's a treasure that they're like, you're lending it out at interest, that parable. You know what I'm saying? Matthew 13:33. It's the 3 parts. So
let's just pull it out a little bit. I very rarely, I don't like to speak in particulars, not necessarily because I have any reticence about going after the guilty, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I say that on my channel. I say that all the time on my channel. Robert does not like to pinpoint against a certain group of people, so it's not doing that. But go ahead with what you're going to say.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they're all wrong, first off. So it's kind of like when it says in Romans, we're all convicted, right? There's no one righteous, not anyone, but it's so because no one is righteous that he can forgive everybody. That, in other words, nobody was right and everybody was wrong, and therefore it is grace to all, and nobody can boast. Right. And the idea is that if any one of these denominations had, quote unquote, been right, not that they could have been, but just the idea that they would have had some ability to boast, like, oh, I was right, or I was closer to the truth than you were, or whatever, when in fact they weren't, so that everybody would have to just get off it and then come on to this other understanding, because that is what is in reserve for us at the end of time. Now, one of the questions I've been asking all these years, because I've been going at this for a long time, because when I say early 90s, all the way up to like about 1997, 98, which is when I finished the preliminary version of the Super Gospel, which I was then calling Living Jesus, Living Legend, but I was trying to also get it published, and they didn't like that for whatever reason, so I changed it. But anyway, that being said, then I had done the guidebook for the elect, and I had come across the idea that you could take Jude and Second Peter and combine them. I came across the idea that that Peter represented the church, and all of the different players like James and John and all, they had spiritual significance, just like Jesus did as the Logos or whatever. And then I was able to find that in a non-canonical book, the secret book of James, I was able to use that exact same principle. So what I was saying was, here in the canonical gospels, you can see it. And here is one over here, which is non-canonical. And if you use the same keys, it translates exactly the same way. It points to children, which are the elect, like it says in the Gospel of Truth. Because again, it's a unitary thought. Like if you read in the Gospel of Truth, it's all about the unity of the thought, the unity. The idea is that if you're able to take all of these gospels and put them together, and it forms a unitary gospel, a harmony of the gospel. You know, the idea is not that it's mine or anyone's in particular. It's just that it's like, if you're sequencing things, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here. You have to sequence them a certain way. If you're ordering ideas, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here. You have to order them a certain way. Like it says in Nicodemus, when they all put their testimonies together at the end, right? And they had written the same story as one another, even though they were in two different.
Like it was exact, like letter for letter. That's crazy that they.
And what I'm saying is that anybody who did what I did would end up with roughly what I ended up with.
Right. That's nuts.
It was
But then that is world changing though. Like that's what
that
I'm saying.
is yeah, because the information goes where it wants to go, is
Right.
what I'm saying. I facilitated that, right? But I didn't do that. I don't take
Right.
credit
But
for that.
to
That was
facilitate
there.
that, using an atheist, not to say anything wrong about you, I'm just saying to use an atheist to do that though is something only Christ could do. Do you see what I'm saying? Just like Carol even said it. I couldn't have done it. Carol couldn't have done it because we had to unlearn the information that we know to even grasp what you're talking about.
But
So
anybody
when
who
we're talking,
started with that postulate could have done it.
right, right,
That's the only thing that separated me from anybody else at the time, was I had a different postulate. I
yep,
had an idea that this stuff was supposed to fit together, and that this stuff was supposed to be holistic and unitary.
right,
Or else, because I was very all or nothing. If someone who knows me knows that I'm either really into something or I'm kind of not. I dabble in a lot of things. I have a huge range of interests. I love learning. I love science. I love so many things. It's hard for me to choose sometimes because I'm drinking out of a fire hose, and especially in this day and age, there's so much to learn. It's almost like candy, it's like, I want to know about this and I want to know about that. And I'm interested in history and I'm interested in beauty, and I'm interested in so many things, what I'm saying?
right,
But that's because the world sort of hangs together and just is inherently interesting. The truth itself is everywhere, and it's just inherently interesting and fascinating if you're open to it, right? So if you have an open mind, there's truth. Just the world just oozes with truth and just oozes with beauty, and it's so full of amazing things that anything that you're interested in, you could literally drink it like it was from a fire hose or something. It's more than any one person. So we're living in a world where we have huge amounts of information, huge amounts of learning, huge amounts of potential, all at our hands, all at our fingertips.
right,
And yet, what I'm saying is that we're inclining towards a world that should be getting freer and should be getting more open, but isn't. That should be getting more, how shall I say, um, with all of this knowledge and with all of this information, you'd think that we would be becoming more and more enlightened. And
right,
as a people, we're moving into what I believe is a very, very dark place.
right,
Now, this isn't me calling this quote unquote the end times or the end days or whatever, because people have been saying that since time immemorial. Even my initial thoughts were that, like, this was all going to happen around the year 2000 or whatever, and of course that came and went.
right,
But that being said, um, the idea that we're not getting freer, or that we're not using this knowledge to really move forward or whatever, to me is a little bit, how should I say, a little bit disturbing. But I kind of feel like there's progress in a way, because I think now that people are becoming more and more aware that a lot of the institutions that they trusted in,
right,
a lot of people are becoming, let's say, disenchanted with the church, and maybe disenchanted with government, and maybe disenchanted with a lot of things, right? Because we're moving in a direction that's frankly frightening, and people are becoming more and more aware of it.
right,
You still got your sleepers, right? You still got your complacent people. You still got your deniers. You still got your people with their heads in the sand about things.
right,
But those of us who don't, those of us who kind of have our head to the ground and know kind of what's going on, the rumblings of it anyway, we're living in a place where our freedoms and our knowledge could be taken away from us
right.
arbitrarily.
You mentioned that a long time ago we could move to that place, and you also mentioned that in a sense it needs to get super dark for the light of the Lord to come out. So, and I think we're
Well,
getting
again, when
close.
he descended into Hades, right?
Yeah,
And that's metaphoric space too. I don't want to get too far into that, but
sure, sure.
this is metaphoric space. All of this is metaphoric space. The underground, the underworld, that also is with reference to the human condition, the age, so to speak,
Yep,
where we are in darkness. And when he descended, they were asking what time was it? It was at midnight,
yep,
right? Which denotes the very darkest time that the light breaks forth, right? And so as we're approaching darkness, this is really what the word indicates, the time in which the truth will be made known, and that the logos, if you will shine forth in the underworld, those of us who are kept underneath the earth, so to speak. That is to say, in the metaphorical sense, we are held in by the metaphorical chains of our sins, and in the darkness of our world, and in the darkness of our understanding, and in the darkness of our hearts, and in the darkness of not having people to teach us the truth. And once the prophets started talking, I saw this light, and they start witnessing.
Right.
That's metaphorical space. That's saying, listen, the prophets are going to start talking to us. They're going to start talking to one another, right? They're going to start witnessing with one another. Remember, David speaking, Adam speaking, all these different prophets are speaking to and from one another. And they're all referring to the coming of the light, the dawning of the light. I spoke of the dawning. I spoke of this. And they all are speaking of this dawning of the truth, that we can come to a level of truth and to a level of enlightenment where we literally uh, where this all ends and where this is all going is that we are going to change our state. It hasn't happened just yet. I don't know just exactly how this is going to look, but let me get a little bit weird on you here for a second.
Please do. That's fine.
Okay. Well, okay, because when you add it all up, like I don't know if you watched the Revelation series. I left off in the next to the last chapter. I'll probably finish that sometime myself.
I've
Carol
seen
wants
I've
to
seen
do
it.
with
I've
me.
seen it 5 or 6. I've done the whole
But
series 5 or
the
6 times.
idea is that when we started getting towards the end, it started talking about our angelic nature,
Yeah,
how we are
Stephen.
going to be like the angels.
Mhm.
Jesus said this himself, that we would be like the angels in the kingdom of heaven, right?
Mhm.
So this is from his own mouth. The idea that and it speaks about this in the Gospel of Philip and various other places, but most notably was with Stephen, who, as a man, as a human being, was beginning to enter into an angelic state where he was he was displaying an angelic nature.
Right.
And what this is an interesting statement about what humans are capable of.
Mhm.
What the people are capable of suppressing the truth and suppressing the good and suppressing what is right to such a point that they would put to death a man who was becoming an angel in front of them.
Right.
So when you really talk about what is depravity, when you talk about the depravity of man, like for example, what I was saying before, um, when I was a little bit younger, I don't think I had I had a level of cynicism of people, but I
Mhm.
don't think I realized the darkness and the depravity of it really up until just now. I would say the last few years have really opened even my eyes to just how dark and depraved human beings are and can be.
Right. Me too.
And I
Yeah.
think that's true of a lot of people. A lot of people were like, people couldn't do that. People couldn't lie like that. Oh yeah, people can lie like that.
Yeah.
People wouldn't do something so evil. Oh yeah, people do things that are pretty darn evil.
Right.
And so it's become real. Like I used to think it was a little bit far-fetched that someone who had raised the dead, who had healed the ill, brought sight to the blind, or whatever, could be railroaded like that in front of the very people that he healed in front of. They're the
Right.
very people that, what I'm saying. I thought as a young Christian, how is that people could be so evil? It almost didn't even seem possible, because if back in the day, again, the information venues through which we had information, were pretty limited, and most of what you would learn was through official sources. So it was hard to get counterpoints and to get
Yeah.
a
You
notion
said
of what was really happening behind the scenes. So you had the illusion that things weren't as bad as they were.
Well, you said Christians don't have any free material for other Christians to work off of, so it's very difficult because everything has to be copyrighted and make money off of it. And that's why I love that
Yeah.
your stuff is free on the
So
website. It's
yeah,
it's so nice to
and
have.
yeah, and yeah, that needed to happen. And again, for some of the Gnostic Gospels anyway, there's a site called thegospels.net, which has some of like Thomas and Philip and various other gospels that you can use. So I recommend using them so you don't get copyright strikes or whatever. People need to produce works.
Right.
It talks about works and stuff. But where I was going with that whole idea was that, yeah, people are that evil. People are that dark. Yeah, you could turn people literally against Jesus Christ.
Right.
Right? You literally can do that. Someone such as Paul, well, who was Saul at the time, he identified as Saul. was able to look at Stephen, Saint Stephen, who had the face of an angel, who was looking up into the sky and could literally see the Son at the right hand of the Father, right? That someone who was manifesting their angelic nature, which is our future state,
Right.
right? Someone who is entering into the state that Jesus promised us, that we would be like angels, right? Like it says in the Ascension of Isaiah, where it says that on that day our spirits will be turned upwards, right? So the idea is that we are going to become angelic at some point.
So
I don't know if it's going to
I just
happen immediate. Uh-huh.
can I interrupt you because I've always wanted to ask you this question. For some reason this word sticks in my head, but you say there's a mechanism that will happen. Is this the mechanism? Is the angelic state, do you think? Like, because, and before you answer, let me just say this one thing, is that I started having prophetic dreams when my house burned down a couple of years ago, and I've had my own dreams, and many other people have had dreams where in the end times, somehow people will become, like you're saying, angelic state. They'll be so bright, and either people will be driven off by them because they're so evil, or they will flock to them to learn about the gospels. And I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but I'm just saying I've heard that. So I don't want to get off on a tangent about dreams, but I'm just saying, is that the
Well,
mechanism?
I think what happened to Stephen is an object lesson, because here was a person who was literally in a transcendent state, and people still killed him.
Right.
That's a warning. That's telling us, look, people are capable of that. That is a harsh reality. But there really is, and I don't mean to sound overly cynical, because this isn't going to be that way for everybody. But
Right.
the institutions that exist aren't going to accept this. I'm
Right.
sure of that. I don't mean to be a naysayer, but I'm very sure. Well, I mean, almost by definition, I mean, if you're quote unquote with the church, right? As long as you continue to remain within that structure, you're going to defend that structure. As
Well,
long as you continue to remain within that.
it'll be like a second Inquisition almost, because those people that were killed during the Inquisition, some of them had direct revelation with God. They were hearing from God, and that's why
They'll
they were killed.
if
So,
they'll put Jesus to death, if they'll put an angel, to death,
right.
right? They'll put you to death. There's no question about it. So I mean, it's very sobering to think. But to your point, some people will be. I think. I mean, how can I put it? What would happen if a person who was of the truth saw that? They would be inclined to believe it, I would think.
Right.
When he was healing all over the place, his reputation got around. People came from all over the place, and he healed them all. He took his time.
Right.
He spent time with the people. Um, but at the end of the day, a lot of those people turned against him because he wasn't what they wanted. He wasn't what they expected.
They wanted
And
like
it just
a
depends on
warrior.
what you want out of life. If
Yeah.
you're the kind of person who wants this world, if you want your place in the church, if you want your place in the government, if you want your place in the economy, if you want your place in this more than you want the kingdom of God, this is bad news for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And people who love power will do anything to hold on to it. People who want the authority and want the accolades and have that vanity within themselves, have that alternate nature within themselves. Because again, there's Cain's seed and there's the seed of Adam.
Right.
They're different. And they haunt us to this day. There are some really dark souls out there who are literally sold to sin, who are
Yep.
literally sold to the world, who are literally satanic, and they're proud of it. To them, it's like a strength. To them, it's like a transcendence for them to be able to do things that other people would never even dream of doing, that wouldn't even enter their thoughts.
But
That they could be that way.
to me though, that what you just mentioned, that satanic strength that they say that they have, for me, I feel like Christians in general would feel like they had more. Like, for instance, I constantly see street preachers all the time, and I feel like they might have more power in their spirits to preach in the streets if they knew that Christ has a cross set up in the underworld still, because the gates of brass are broken open, if they knew about the gospel of Nicodemus and the stories within it, because it gives you, for me anyways, it gives me hope and it gives me peace and strength to know that the devil really is defeated. And I didn't know that how badly he was defeated until I read that book. You know what I'm saying? So
Well, one of the things that I was trying to, I don't know if I made my point earlier, but let me just go back and try to nail it down a little bit.
sure.
What I was saying earlier about the actual data that exists, for example, in the book of Jude and elsewhere, but just because that one nails it so precisely, it goes down the line. He cites the source, right? He cites the antiquity, right? He gives him the cred, if you will, by calling him a prophet, right? And it gives you the source so that you can match the two together and know that this is that. When you really break it down, those were things he was thinking about, and that was why he worded it that way. He wanted you to know those things, right? So I would say to anyone who was an atheist, or anyone who was of some other religious faith, or anybody who was of no faith, anybody anywhere who has any doubts or any skepticism, here's what I would encourage them to think about. Not only the concepts that we talked about just now, because again, I was a hard-bitten atheist. I mean, I don't know. I was the kind of person who thought Christians were, to be blunt, I thought they were stupid. Like, why do you want to believe this? You know, there's no pie in the sky. You know what I'm saying? Yep. This is a giant cosmic accident. Enjoy it while you're here. Don't waste your life. Right? That was kind of my appeal. I'm like, come on, man. You know what I'm saying? But there were things that I felt like he appealed to my rationality, and through my rationality, I was able to transcend that limitation that I had. And I think everybody's got their own thing that they've got to transcend before they see it before. And I believe that God has his own way of getting to everyone individually in a way in which he knows that they'll understand, but he's the one who does the reaching.
Well, he kind of backdoored you on your own equation. Truth governs logic, logic governs math, and he went backwards on you and kind of like started showing you mathematical equations that couldn't add up, basically by showing you those books as you asked for, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, like I said, that was the way to reach me, and I think everybody who he's reaching after, maybe somebody else will have a different path, but he'll reach you through whatever path. If he wants you, he'll get through to you. That's what I feel like.
That video that you removed that talked about actual factual things that an atheist believes, that one, you put it up and then you took it down because people were being jerks about it, because you were trying to show people this is what an atheist believes and this is what we need to do to combat an atheist ideologies, because you were an atheist. So you're coming at it with like, hey, this is how I used to feel. We need to go against this by using the scriptures, basically, right?
He's given us the tools to do battle in the world of the secular. He's given us the tools that we need to overcome this world. This is what I'm telling you. The idea is that it doesn't matter where you're coming from. Like, if you just took what I just said right now, right, and see it on a literary level, not necessarily as a believer, right? And this is why I use commonplace terms that I know it drives people up the wall. I say Jesus Christ because that's the name that everybody knows. And I'm speaking to people everywhere. I'm not demanding that they see things exactly the way I do. I'm trying to reach them where they are. And that's my intent. But the idea is that that if you were to read the Bible, like, let's say, like you were to read the Odyssey, or if you were to read it like, let's say, Huckleberry Finn or something else, if you were to read it just as that, right, you could make out the features that I'm talking about. If I was talking about the Odyssey, for example, I could talk to you about features that are inherent in the literature, like what meter is this, or what cadence is this, right? I could break it down into, okay, this is this act, and this is that act, and this is, what I'm saying? I could break it down in terms of its literary features.
Well, like, if you said, if you read a book and you said, is this English? And you said, yes, it's English. It's the same thing. It's like, because it's true in the literal sense, because it's a book, because it's true in that sense is what you're saying, then it's true. Like, other people, like many different kinds of people can understand it because they just understand the way like words are written, the history is written, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, in other words, let's say you were a total atheist, or you were some other religion or whatever, and you read the book of Jude. If I was a high school teacher or college teacher and I assigned you the book of Jude and I said, hey, look, I don't care what your belief is. Let's just break it down, right? Let's just break it down. Let's break it down like we'd break anything down, right? I could tell you features that exist, right? The actual wording, like I said, it speaks of that as the source. It speaks of the source as being ancient. It speaks of the source as being authoritative, and it presents to you text from the source. So I could say that as a literary fact.
Right.
All right. A fact of literature, whether you agreed with it or not. You could be the most flaming atheist in the whole world, and you could still see that literarily that's what it says, right? You could take Jude and think this is the dumbest thing I ever read, but it doesn't change the fact that he said that. So it doesn't matter where you're coming from. The argument exists. And
It's
like
like
we
the
were talking
questions.
about earlier, the
It's
secret
like the
language.
questions. It's like the questions that are inherent when you talk about Second Peter. The inherent questions, like he asked the question, he like tells you the answer because he's basically asking you a question, like the algebra thing you were talking about.
Well, and like I said, I've basically done, I would consider, two major works. One is the guidebook for the elect, which for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, and I don't know who will or who won't, but for those of you who might be confused about parables and parabolic language and stuff, I would refer you to the guidebook for the elect. I would ask you to read that. In fact, I may actually re-upload that in some other form or
It's my
fashion here
favorite.
before too long,
I listen to it all the time.
because that is a major overall exposition of the ideas that I'm trying to present. All right, so that's the idea angle. That's the keys. That's the insights, etc. Then, of course, there's the super gospel, which is a manifestation of the unitary, self-sustaining. I don't know, the unitary nature of the logos, the way in which it all hangs together, despite whatever source it comes from. It just builds and builds and builds and builds, and that's a literary case. Because in other words, if you took it as literature and not necessarily as an article of faith, you might arrive at faith by means of taking it by looking at the actual fact of what it is. In other words, if you're honest with yourself, that could change your perspective. Even to read it with some level of skepticism, if you were to ask yourself the simple question, how does this all fit together? Why does this work? Why does it start here in this source and have progress over here in this next source, progress further in another source, and then conclude in a final source somehow, some way? How do all those pieces come together and form another, an arc in the story, or an arc in the theme, or something like that, without it being intentional? A person might ask themselves those kinds of questions. So I mean, these are the kinds of things which they don't go through me. They don't go through you. I mean, the truth is the truth is the truth, and it doesn't go through any of us. None of us can make 1 + 1 = 5 or whatever. Oh yeah, you got it. Thank you. I appreciate you buying that. But yeah, I mean, oh wow.
I give
I
them
don't
away.
even think I got 4 copies of it. I think I gave all mine away.
No, people ask me for it sometimes. They're like, I don't have any money. Can you send me? I just buy it and send it to them because I like. It's the most important thing I own. Like I read. I don't know if you know this, but I found you on Zen Garcia's channel back when you did your first show with him. Then from there, me and my wife started listening to all your works after that, and then right now my current channel, I read and combine a bunch of Zen's books, and I always go back to the Super Gospel when I'm reading it because it has so much powerful information. It just shows you every detail, and I know it so well from the audio. I don't even have to look at what it is. I know exactly what I'm reading because I know the audio so well. It helped me a lot.
Yeah, and so anybody who's reading this, you don't have to. I mean, look, I appreciate people buying it. I don't make a living off of this book. I mean, I honestly barely make any money off of this book. And that's not a complaint. I'm just telling you, I gave it away because that wasn't my goal. My goal wasn't to sell books. I put it up on YouTube for anyone to read along with who wants to read along with it. I don't charge anybody anything. If you want to skip past the commercials or whatever, that's fine too. I don't expect anything from anybody. All right. That's the idea. I try to make it so that everybody has access to this information. If they go to the scriptural-truth website, scriptural-truth.com, the great guy.
I have it up right now too.
On my video. Great guy runs that site. His name is Rick. He does it on his own dime. He doesn't charge me anything to run it. So whatever you donate to that page, again, that's to keep that information, whatever, but I don't get that. You know what I'm saying? So it's not, I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to show you the truth. And I think in a lot of ways I've devalued it by giving it away, because if it were something that I held close to myself and put paywalls between you and me, right, I could probably get people to buy into it, right? But that's not what I'm about at all. You give it away, you put it out there, and I think that a lot of people, just because it's not, there's no money in it or whatever, that they don't think that it's worth, you know, their time or whatever. But it is worth your time, because again, it's the words where they want to go. It's the words where they want to fit. It's something that transcends a book. It's something that transcends thinking. How, you know, it's something that if you get a grasp on the fact that it's one story told by something like 100 different people,
Right.
how is this possible? It isn't really possible in the carnal sense. It's only really possible. So I mean, it's there as an avenue for insight and for people to grasp the unitary nature of the word, of the logos, that the logos is something that transcends any one person. It lives in all of us.
But can
You
I
know what
just
I'm
say one
saying?
thing, Robert? Is that I literally, I can't claim that I've ever told anybody about Christ and they came to God. Like, I don't have a ton of those types of stories, but like my wife, Jackie, her little brother, he's the same age as my son. I won't explain how that worked out, but they're the same age because my children are from a different previous relationship. So he's like he was at my wedding with my son. I have a picture of me holding both of them when they were like 3 at my wedding. So he became a Christian by the knowledge that I got from the gospel, the super gospel. He became a Christian. His name is Christian, actually. So his name is Christian. He became a Christian from that knowledge. And that's not the only person. I have many people that are my subscribers that have told me that the super gospel changed their life. So it's not a trivial thing that you did, and there is eternal rewards for people that make these, do these things, and the gospel is to be told, not sold. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
and
That's
this and oh, I almost say that's amazing. I never even know what to say, because I hear that a lot from people. It's something I hear a lot. It's hard for me to relate to, because like you, I don't have a lot of personal stories. I think people, they say don't judge a book by the cover. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Um, I think in the Gospel of Philip it says something about this too. You know, that a person doesn't put a treasure in something that's really showy and expensive. They'll put it in something that looks, cheap and unappealing. You know
right,
what I'm saying? Because nobody's going to go try and steal it from there.
right,
You know, and so it can be humble in its appearance. Um, and I think the same thing sort of applies to me. I don't come across as being like particularly charismatic or particularly whatever. And so when I speak, a lot of times it just goes over people's heads, and I don't know why. For me, it's like I get a ton of pushback from people, and it's always amazing to me when people talk about myself and my wife, or myself and my kids, or what I'm saying.
right.
It's amazing to me, because I think people do a lot of judging by the cover, and they don't see the important message, what I'm saying, that's there, because it's what that is a demonstration of, is something that is so far beyond anything surface level. It's so transcendent, and it's powerful on its own because of what it is. And that's the thing. It is
Well,
what it is.
maybe sometimes the things that you speak go over people's heads, though, because like for instance, it's just a simple metaphor, but I'm saying, like, how like sometimes like a general will be talking to captains, and then the people below the captains don't necessarily understand what the general said because they don't understand the big picture type thing. maybe
Mm.
maybe in a sense what the things you speak sometimes, like certain shows like that you've done, are so high up in the spiritual realm that they're only meant for generals, you know what I'm saying, or other captains, or you know what I'm saying. But I know
Mhm.
the whole overview of the super gospel is for everyone, and it's easy to understand on that level. But like the gospel itself, there's multiple layers, I think, that you address, like, because there's certain people, like you and I can have a fluent conversation. There's people that have no idea what we're talking about, honestly, even Christians, like my parents. I tried telling them this. I got them the super gospel. I tried having them read it, and they just don't get what I'm saying. They don't. They have no clue. It's like poof, like gone. It's out in one ear, out the other.
It's a great reference. Even if you don't understand the deep spiritual meaning or whatever, it's because it's consolidated into one place, and because it's linear, you get a sense of you get a sense of everything that was written and all of the traditions that existed at the time. You get a sense of what early Christians believed, because there are a lot of things that if you go into the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth centuries, you see people still alluding to these books.
Right.
You know, they were still in the popular consciousness of people centuries later. It wasn't as if there was this really hard line between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and the Proto-Evangelion or the infancy gospel of Thomas. There wasn't this really hard and fast line. There were people who read all of those books and had all of this knowledge. You know what I'm saying? The what we call the canon was a distortion.
Right.
It proved to be a distortion because by saying only these and not these, right, you have a whole other understanding. If you're reading early Christian sources, you're reading all of these different traditions, and now you're altering what was commonly agreed upon or commonly understood into something else. So just of necessity, it created a distortion, and so we've been living with that distortion for centuries.
Right. Well, the measuring, it's odd that a measuring cane can change so much. Like the canon comes from the word, the measuring cane. So it's strange because usually a measuring cane is a definite measure. So it's odd that it could change so rapidly. And so it was actually so rapidly for one, and also change over such a long period of time as well, because we only got rid of the Apocrypha in the 1800s. You know, that's really weird.
But in the end, we're given a different rod. We're given a rod of iron.
Right.
The idea,
that's funny. I'm reading that right now.
And the idea is that, well, the iron basically connotes.
I don't know if you've seen this. I'm reading this right now. It's you can't see it. It's one of Zen's books. It's called The Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, which is the rod of iron that you're talking about, God's rod of iron.
The idea is that the canon isn't what people say it is. The canon is the truth itself. Right. Like you were saying earlier, if I gave you a book, forget what the book is about, and I asked you, is this written in English or not? Right. You know, I could give you a children's book. I could give you, Shakespeare. I could give you, whatever. And I only asked you one question: is this written in English? Do you understand the words? Forget whether you like it or not, whether it's your taste or not. Just, is it written in English? Or you could answer because you speak English.
Right.
So if a book is written in codes, like we talked about earlier, if you know that the Tin Man is the Industrial Revolution guy, or whatever, if you understand it like that, then everything that you read takes on that other added significance. Okay, this is why he's searching for a heart. This is why this guy's searching for a brain. You know what I'm saying? This is why this guy is searching for courage. You know what I'm saying? Right. This is why. Okay, and all of a sudden it opens up all these doors of understanding. You get it, right? It rings true. It's something that's far more than what's just there on the surface. So if you understand that Peter is the church, if you understand that James is the Jews, if you understand that John is the elect who are to come, remember he says, if it should be my will that he should remain until I come, what is that to you? You know what I'm saying? You follow me. Right, with reference to John and Peter, right? So the idea is there's a sequencing, James, John, Peter, that they represent something beyond themselves in the same way that the characters in that allegory do. They symbolize something different. And so understanding that is, like I was saying before, it's just as if I handed you a book and said, is this in English or not? If I handed you the secret book of James and I said, look, I see James in here, I see Peter in here. What if they mean the same thing? Now, what kind of understanding do you get out of the book now that you see with those through that lens? Let's say, what are you seeing now? Right now, all of a sudden, it's a story about the age to come, and that there will be people at the end of the age who are going to make everything clear about the age that had just passed. Right, and now all of a sudden, that's news you can use, because now that's a book that you can exposit. Right. And that's something you can share with other people and say, hey, look, see this? There's information here that you weren't seeing before. I can open up your spiritual eyes. I'm not giving you pie in the sky. I'm telling you, I'm giving you eyes to see with and ears to hear with. Because I'm great? No, because it's a promise. When Jesus said, look, you will do greater things than John the Baptist because I go to my Father. Right? Even the least of you will be greater than John the Baptist. Right? The Gospel of Thomas, you should lower your eyes, but guess what? You're still going to do greater things than he did. right? So it means, look, I'm going to use humble people. I'm going to use people who are nothing and nobody, right? So that nobody thinks they're all that. But I'm going to give you something that's going to finish the job. I'm going to give you tools with which you can finish this, right? That you can bring this to a conclusion. And that's what this is. That's what I was talking about. What is the future? Where do we go from here? You know, the idea is that this is sort of decentralized. If everybody sees the truth, then it's coming from everybody. If everybody understands the mystery, then it's coming from everybody. You can't cut off the head of that hydra if everybody knows the truth, because people are going to be popping up everywhere with this knowledge.
Well,
So how do
it
we
says
share
that
this knowledge?
it says somewhere, I saw it on a very unpopular channel, like had 200 views, but he said in the end times, the elect will, he said the 144,000, you know, I don't want to get into the debate about that, but he said that the 144,000 will all be singing the same song. And it reminds me of what you're saying, is that everybody will speak the same thing. Everybody will know the mysteries that have been hidden since the beginning of time,
Yeah, and
basically.
that's like in the book of Revelation where it talks about people hymning. It's because when you're
Yeah,
singing a song, everybody's either singing their little part in time with but it's one big whole,
right.
right? So everybody's either singing the same thing or they're singing their part of the same thing. But regardless of how you look at it, they're in harmony with one another. They're harping, they're singing, they're all in tune, they're all in concert with one another. That's how it's going to be. We're all going to be in concert with one another. You know, I might be ringing the little triangle or something like that, and somebody else might be playing, you know, the harp or something.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But
Yep.
everybody's on the same page here, and everybody's singing the same song, metaphorically, of course, you know, because
Yeah,
that's
but
what that kind of denotes.
I heard Jesus say one time, I forget the text, but he said, like, they said, what do you, something, and he said, I only have these white stones. And so it also, that harmony also reminds me of the shepherd of Hermas, where there's the tower, which is the white stones that build the true church in the end times, or whatever. I assumed it's the end times because the woman changes her appearance 3 times or whatever, so she's old by then. So it's like
Mhm.
kind of like where Peter is old and he's like an old man at the end of, he says, I know you love me, or feed my lambs, or feed my sheep, or whatever. Like the age, you can see the time cues, like of how it changes over time. So it references almost like his 3 denials. He says, feed my sheep, he doesn't do it, or feed my lambs or whatever, he doesn't do it, feed my sheep, and then whatever. You know what I'm saying? That part of the Bible where he said, you know, it's like the different times where Peter denied him over, which is the church, over the course of time, and then he never does it, and then the elect have to come in, which is John.
Mhm.
John has to teach everybody the truth, and then, like you said, hopefully the church uses some of its resources to help John preach the gospel, because at the end they do preach together.
And so, for those of you who might not be following what he's talking about, again, I would, not to repeat myself, but I would go back and I would look on my channel for the guidebook for the elect, because he's obviously read it along with a million other things too. This is the first time we've actually ever spoken, you know what I'm saying, or done an interview together. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? And we're already on the same page, right? That's the thing. That's the strength of this argument, because he's got eyes to see just the same as me, and anyone else could have eyes to see. When he says go out and, you know, heal the sick among them, you know, the idea is that people are, again, there's a physical level and there's a spiritual level. People can be sick on the physical, but when he heals someone who's physically ill, he's healing, in effect, on the spiritual level. He's healing them spiritually. When he's healing people's physical eyes, again, not to sound like a broken record, but he's healing their spiritual eyes. There's always a spiritual meaning. There's always that allegorical understanding. Dorothy isn't just Dorothy. The scarecrow isn't just the scarecrow. All right. And Jesus and James and John or whatever, they also represent things beyond themselves. And so, in just the same way, right, if you can understand the language, if you can understand the English, so to speak, then you get it. And so you grow from that because you understand. I mean, it's just it's just something that builds on itself. And like, I've never come across anything that caused me to think I was ever wrong, right? And
Mhm.
you've never come across anything, right, to ever think that this was really wrong. This is
Well,
it. This is what I'm
I,
trying to tell you.
I went to I went to Christian school my whole life, Robert. Like I know Carol mentioned that she was in a church a long time. I've been in Christian school from kindergarten till 12th grade, and then I went to public college at Wentworth in Boston, and so I went. directly into the lion's den, so to speak. And I had no idea about the world. I was the most naive person ever. And when I read the super gospel, there's not one thing that conflicts with all the teachings that I ever got from the church. In fact, a lot of their teachings conflict because they didn't even know what they were talking about. When you read this, it just brings the light. It's like a light switch goes on every time you read it. Like, for instance, when Jesus is 3 years old and I think he's 3 years old and he's leaving Egypt with Mary and Joseph, and the two thieves come, and then they don't, one doesn't want to sound the alarm for them and one does, so he can rob them or whatever. And then Jesus says, these two men will be crucified next to me when I'm in 30 years from now. Mary says, God forbid. So you find out, why did Jesus choose the thief that he chose? Like, and I'm not saying that's why he chose him, but you never know, why did he pick that thief? Because yes, Jesus, he does accept that Jesus is the Christ. He sees the things that are happening around him as he's dying next to Christ. So he sees those things, but it also gives some credence to the fact that that thief was the one that helped them escape. He said, I pledge my belt and I'll give you 40 sheep or something if you just let Mary, Joseph, and Jesus go. And then Jesus says, oh, so it just fulfills the story. It's like, why didn't I know that growing up? Why didn't I hear that when I was in the churches? It makes me sick to my stomach, honestly.
Well, what people tend to do, I think the devil has a kind of divide and conquer strategy. The knowledge is unitary. It's a singular knowledge. What happens over here bears on what's over there. What happens in this book bears on what's in the other book, and that bears on what's in the other book, and it just goes on and on and on. Like I said, I've been reading a lot of the Gnostic Gospels lately because I'm trying to master them. I'm trying to like get my head around it, and it takes a lot of just listening. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. I mean, this is faith. It's not some weird pie in the sky like what they call gnosis or whatever. It's nothing weird or freaky or mysterious about it. It's like what I was saying before. It's like an insight. It's like you get it. It's like when you understand that there are books outside of the canon. It's like everybody in the church says there's a canon. Everybody who's in the church, it's like that whole idea just disappears and you're liberated from it. You're free from it. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, I don't have those shackles on my mind anymore. I don't have those barriers anymore. I have a true freedom. I know the truth, and the truth has set me free. It has already done so. Like if you hear what I'm saying, your spiritual ears are opening. If you see what I'm talking about, your spiritual eyes are already opening, right? If you're able to articulate what I'm saying, he's already loosed your tongue. Right. Okay. That's what all this means. So it is enlightenment for people. It is a certain level of enlightenment. What I'm saying, he's going to ramp it up at some point because he's going to make prophets out of us. He's going to make martyrs out of us. He's going to make angels out of us. He's going to use us. This is what's happening. Again, I'm not one of those like end of days people. I really, really avoid talking about that because I don't want to get caught up in any kind of other thing. I want to keep my eye on the ball. You know what I'm saying? I feel like
no, it has to be that way, Robert, because there's certain people that are tasked with certain things, and when you go down that road, it's almost like you get sucked back into the different people that have prophecy books about Revelation, and then it gets away from the metaphoric language that you get with that series.
If you hear what I'm saying, you have ears to hear. Right. If you see what I'm saying, you have eyes to see.
I love that.
That's what the Bible says. That's what the Bible says. Heal the sick among them. Give them, eyes to see and ears to hear. That's the command.
When you go into their churches, you eat what they feed you, which is talking about the spiritual food. Like, show them these books, how they relate to their books. They might not.
If somebody only wants to believe the canon, right? I can still show them out of the canon that what I'm saying is true.
Right.
I can eat whatever they place in front of me, and I can still heal the spiritually sick among them. I can still open their eyes with just what they believe. That's the strength of this argument. It's a gift. It's a grace. It's been given to all of us, right? This is what's important. This is why it says shout it from the rooftops. And what I'm saying is I think that society, up until I would say very recently, has been very complacent. Like the Laodiceans, it talks about that. Why is that the final stage of church development? Why do we end up at the Laodiceans? The idea is they're fat and happy. Yeah. They're living the good life. I know what that's like. I'm pretty much fat and happy and living the good life myself. You know what I'm saying? I'm here and I'm living in amid, the great wealth of my nation, and a great and prosperous time where there's truth and there's freedom and there's knowledge, whatever, to the nth degree. But at the same time, if I didn't have a thirst for this knowledge, all of that would be empty, right? You got to have that unction. You got to have that sense of this is important. This is what we need to know, and this is what we need to teach, and this is what we need to understand. But what I'm telling you is, if you hear me, you get it. And when you get it, you're free from all that came before, and now you can move forward. And now, if there's dozens or hundreds or thousands or 144,000 or however many it ends up being, however many elected there are, right, then we will be the ones to draw, if you will, the heavenly Jerusalem as it descends. Because again, Paul talks about a Jerusalem above and a Jerusalem below. So this is a metaphorical space that we're talking about again, right? So when you read in Revelation about Jerusalem coming down, people want to reify that and make it about something real and concrete, so to speak. But it's also metaphorical space. It's about drawing that kingdom down to ourselves. And the way that we do that, or it comes down to be with us, the way that we do that is that we become the elect. And then it just happens. Our hearts unite with his. We sit down on his throne because he sat down on it. And we do as he did because he made that possible for us. He gave us these things to find. He gave us these mysteries to discover. He gave us all of this stuff. And like I said, it's just treasure after treasure after treasure after treasure. It just never ends. And like you keep finding it, I keep finding it. And dozens of people I've talked to just keep on finding stuff. And we all tend to come to the same conclusions, And it's like, yeah, I don't try to get sidetracked on other things, because to me, this is what's giving me progress. I'm like that guy. You ever play that video game Tron? You know what I'm saying? You're trying to be on that bike and you're going 10,000 miles an hour, and the only thing you can think about is trying to outmaneuver that other bike. You know what I'm saying? There isn't time to think about all this peripheral stuff. Whatever that is, that's secondary. This is the primary thing. Get the word into people's hands. Get the mystery into people's hearts. Open their eyes. Open their ears. And whatever else he's going to reveal to us will be revealed. But this is the crucial thing. It's called a covenant for a reason. It's a legal document between God and man. He's going to create a like the world's greatest attorney or something. He's got a case going. Right. And like I said before, it's all literary. It doesn't matter if you're a believer or not. It's still true. It's still true that Jude calls him ancient. It's still true that he calls him a prophet. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It's an airtight case logically. So anybody out there with any kind of sense would realize that, listen, this is something that applies whether you're a believer or not. It might make you a believer. You might eventually become a believer, but you don't have to be that coming into it. It's algebraic. It's ironclad. It is like a rod of iron. This is how you know what's real and what's not because somebody says this is canon, but the ironclad part of it is that because you speak the language and you understand, you can decode, you can explain it. Therefore, that's the true tie that binds. That is the true iron, if you will, that makes it authoritative, is the truth in and of itself.
Well, I told you by text a long time ago, just to give for instance to it, is that I was working, and I used to work for a cleaning company, and I was measuring a church to be cleaned, a new church right across the street from my office. And I asked the pastor, he was going to be retiring, and I said, if your script, I didn't say your scripture, but I said, if 2 Peter or whatever the verse was, it says every man lives once and then the judgment. And Elijah and Enoch are the only two people that were translated directly to heaven. Wouldn't that mean that they are the two witnesses that come at the end of time? I didn't mention Nicodemus. I didn't mention anything. And he had nothing. He goes, and then I went into it and I said, this is this and this is this. And he had nothing, could not say. All he said to me was, wow, you're pretty smart, huh? That's all he said. He didn't even refute, because he couldn't refute it, because he knew I was right. But he said, well, our people, meaning conflicting with the Bible, truly. He said, our people think it's Moses that's the one of the two witnesses. And I was like, I didn't say it, but I'm like, honestly, how can that be? If Moses died at 120 years old and it's historically true that he died, but the other two didn't, then how can you say that if Peter says that you know that they went directly to heaven or whatever? So it's just, I don't know, it's just crazy to me that people can't see those,
Well,
especially
there's
past
the
tense.
idea that because he turned the water into blood or whatever, and also the idea that at the transfiguration there was Moses and there was Elijah. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And so I think the notion there, but well, I don't mean to open
Yeah,
that can of worms, but
yeah, but
that
Robert, you disprove that yourself though by telling what that means, because Moses represents the Jews with James, and Jesus
Mhm.
represents Peter with, you know, in that line, and then you have the elect is Elijah, because Jesus said John the Baptist is Elijah that comes at the end or
Yeah,
whatever. You know what I'm saying?
the way that the logos is again when he was speaking to John and Patmos, what he said about himself, he is the one who is, that is to say, right there and then in that Christian age,
Yeah.
who was, right, which is to say the scripture and the prophecies or whatever before him spoke of him, and then who is to come, because he's speaking of his own return, right?
Right.
And it's in that order: what is, what was, and what is to come. And it's the same as the time, the times, and half a time, in that same vein, right? When he speaks metaphorically again in the Bible about there was silence in heaven for the space of half an hour. All right. Well, you have to understand what a time is. A time is 2,000 years in that particular metaphor, right? And he says, what is the time, in other words, time, times, and half time, what is, what was, and what is to come, in that order, like that, the way he speaks it. So he's speaking in the present, the time is at hand, that's the 2,000 years, right? That it's for a time and times, that was what was, and that was 2 times 2,000, which is 4,000, right? So that's 4,000 years plus 2,000 years, and then half a time is half of 2,000, which is 1,000, which is the millennium, right? So when he's breaking up time in terms of its 3 components, the time, which was then when he was speaking with John at Patmos, which was then current, which represents the Christian age of 2,000 years, right? And the times, of course, represented the Jews. That was the time of James, right? And then the time to come, which is half an hour. Again, the half a time, again, being 1,000 years, that corresponds to the rest that we have. Silence in heaven. That means that we are all on the heavenly level and we are all at rest at that point, right? So it's the true Sabbath, in other words, where it's not only the 1,000 years, which are the 7th day, so to speak. A day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years. Right? See what I'm saying? It all feeds, it goes in and around on itself, doesn't it? All the different patterns just go in and around on themselves. It's something you just pick up and you understand intuitively once you get a few ideas and a few understandings. That opens up every door. It opens up so many doors.
Well, like for instance, pigs are false Christians, Jews are dogs are false Jews. So when Jesus cast the demons into the 2,000 pigs, that's the 2,000 years where the false Christian age is ruling over mankind. Like that's
it's funny. I was about to bring that up too, but that's what this is just case in point. So great minds think alike or whatever. There's a logic to it,
right? But if you backdoor that, if you go back on that, if you find out what the source of that parable is, it's Ahikar, which is removed from the canon, which Ahikar was a vizier, like a super wise man who was given a child as an adopted son, who was his nephew or whatever, who screwed him over basically.
Right.
And but you find out why did he get that as his son? Why didn't he get a son when he prayed for him? Because he prayed to idols first. So it has to do with idols. Then you go into like what is it, Mattius or something. There's like a gospel of Mattius that he talks about like how the idols are the reason that they separate themselves from the pagans, is because of idols. We don't worship idols, he says. And then you go to the testament of Job, which isn't in the canon, the actual testament. The reason Job was actually tested is because he destroyed a statue, an idol that had Satan possessed inside of it. And so Job knew that he was going to be tested because he did that. He was told beforehand. But everybody always says, oh, God's not just because he did all his mean things to Job. No, Job approved of that contest and he wanted to battle Satan in that contest. And it had to do with idols. And that's I don't want to pick on any group, but I'm saying that we know the Catholics changed the 10 Commandments. I have a Catholic Bible right here. They changed the 10 Commandments, and most of the books that are removed talk about idol worship. And so all these books that have to do with one another and teach you a lot of the keys and confirm the keys, they speak about idol worship. And that's what God said. He hates all that stuff that is currently in this world system. And idols can be many other things besides statues, but for the most part, that's what was going on in pagan times. Even in the super gospel, where the flags, when he's going in to talk to Pilate, the flags had fallen angel statues on the top of them, and they all bowed down before Jesus because they're all representative of the fallen angels. And even when he went through Egypt, all the statues crumbled and fell down, and all the demons were cast away just by Jesus being around him.
Right, and in metaphorical terms too, we could look at our institutions as idols. We could look at our traditions as idols. We can look at everything that we've been taught just topples. Like what we were saying before, once you get this understanding, it's like automatically you know that the canon is wrong. So that everything that's been built on that concept goes right out the window first thing. So you already have a kind of a conversion experience at that point where you recognize that idol has fallen, that has shattered into a million pieces and no longer is, right? So you no longer bow down to that. In other words, you don't put your time and your energy and your thoughts into that futility that can do nothing for you, right? So in metaphorical sense, what it's really talking about is the idea of being free from anything earthly or anything created by people's hands or minds or thoughts or whatever. The idea is that these institutions are gone. So we're at the end of the age. This is my assessment. We are at the end of the age because we have this knowledge. That's the way we know. We waited for it. Seek and you will find, right? Know the truth and the truth will make you free. If you understand what we're talking about, if you out there listening kind of get the gist of what we're talking about, some of you I'm sure already know all this stuff. A lot of times I feel like I'm just preaching to the choir. We need to probably evangelize and get this out to people and promote it to people. You know what I'm saying? But the idea is that we become of one mind and we become of one spirit because we share this understanding, and we're freed from the shackles of this idolatry that's been going on for 2,000 years. And like you were saying, when you see pigs, for example, and swine and dogs together all the time. And for people who didn't catch what he was talking about, in 2 Peter, it says that of them this proverb is true, that the dog returns to its own vomit, which is in Proverbs. Was it chapter 26 or something?
Yeah, it's what comes out of his mouth too. So it's the vomit that comes out of your mouth. So it's what you speak. That's why Jesus said, that's why Jesus, when he spit in the guy's eyes and that he could see finally, it's because it was direct revelation. When he spit in the ground and put the mud in his eyes, that was because
it was mixed with the earthly.
That's the earth. Yeah.
See what I'm saying? You got to be able to see in images like this, that, Thomas talks about this, the images, or the heavenly wealth has been placed in poverty, which is a symbol of the fleshly level understanding. We live in this poverty because we follow the flesh, and that's all idolatry. This is all false concept, false consciousness that's been foisted upon the church. Like I said, you transcend that false consciousness first thing. I don't say the real transcendence is in knowing that this is God we're talking about here. But in layman's terms, the transcendence comes when you recognize that what you believe is of necessity false.
Right.
It is the first thing. That's the first step, is that the idols crumble. The only reason to be in the church at all is to try to salvage people out of it, or to try and perhaps get people into these thoughts or whatever.
Well, these things that we're talking about, Jesus said when he was talking to John in the cave, he said people talk about his suffering all the time. So that's what they're doing in churches. But he said there's things that I suffered that they don't talk about. What we're talking about is the things that he suffered that nobody talks about, which is his work.
And for those of you, this is something that I put into the super gospel. Again, it's all of this is in chronological order, basically, like I said, where the words want to go. So this was naturally placed at the time of his crucifixion, because this particular vision that we're talking about chronologically takes place at the time in which he's being crucified. He's saying, listen, look at those people who are down there. what they see is not the true meat. What they see is just the flesh, this sort of this lower level meaning or whatever. But he's saying is, look, what's being crucified is the logos, and that's what he's saying. He's trying to lift his thinking up from the fleshly to the spiritual. This doesn't negate the fact that see, this is where a lot of people go wrong. They try to see Gnosticism as either this or that. Like it's either all metaphorical or it's all real.
Right.
Okay. The idea is that you don't have to really make that distinction. Him dying in the flesh and resurrecting in the flesh is not something I would say was wrong. In fact, it even says that in First John, that anyone who denies that he's come in the flesh is Antichrist.
Right.
The idea is that you need to see him doing these things as a metaphor, or including, in other words, it's the higher level meaning being couched in the physical level. I don't want to say lower level because I don't want to take away from his actual physical pain and suffering and all of that.
But he said it was a gift given to mankind. The fact that he did it, the fact that he couched it in this way and in these terms, for all mankind to understand, because like, for instance, speaking in tongues or whatever, a lot of people say, speak in tongues and they say all this stuff in churches and stuff, and you don't understand what the heck they're saying, whatever. I don't know if it's speaking in tongues per se, but in the Bible, it's when they understood that they were all speaking different languages and they were there for the Passover or whatever, and they all understood what the disciples were saying. In a sense, that's what I'm saying, is that people from every different language, like you said, they know what water is, they know what mountains are, they know what gardening terms are, because and a lot of them are fishermen around the world because they're not as rich as we are in America. So he gave it to all of mankind as a gift. So yeah, you'd probably have to speak it in their language if you weren't speaking in tongues, but the metaphor, the physical words like pigs and dogs and all these things, these keys that are given back to us. So originally the Pharisees or whoever they were, the church leaders, they hid the keys so they couldn't get into heaven, and then they don't let us get into heaven. But now, by knowing the keys, a lot of people that were atheists, agnostics, people that were part of Catholicism, part of all these different denominations or whatever, now they can see it because they understand these simple terms. And I'm sure there's going to be miracles that happen because of it. If Jesus said we're going to be greater than John the Baptist in spirit, not saying we're better than him, but
it's a picture language. That's why you keep running across the words like images. The images are manifest to people, but the light that is in those images, right, is hidden by the light in the light of my Father, right? And there's so much to unpack. This is one of the hard things about having a conversation, because there's always things to unpack. Everything you say in passing really only makes sense to people who are up to speed on this. And that's why you really got to get into this. I'm not trying to sell you guys snake oil or anything. This is something that you will come to understand. It's not something that, maybe, or what, you'll see it, you'll get it. That I can say that with 100%. If you approach this with the truth in mind, you will see it. I've come across so many people who see it. And again, it's because it was left for us to discover. It is a tool, it is a legal document to use, I wouldn't say against the world or against the church or whatever, because that sounds really belligerent. But the idea is,
Robert, Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," to Peter. So it wasn't that he was necessarily condemning Peter. He was condemning the satanic part of what he was saying, which was the church.
That's right. And understanding, just a real quick unpacking of that. Peter, of course, represents the church. When he was on the way to Caesarea Philippi, he says, "Who do men say that I am?" And eventually Peter says, "Well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Well, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, son of John, because flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven." So the contrast is between the Father in heaven and flesh and blood, which is to say, again, the two levels, the fleshly level and the spiritual level, right? The heavenly level, in other words, my Father in heaven, right, has revealed this to you. Right. And he says, "Now I say that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Right. So the idea is that Peter is associated with the church there in that particular metaphor. So when he says, "Get thee behind me, Satan," he's talking about the church age. In other words, just wait until this is over. and there will be no more Satan. In other words, put it behind you.
Yeah.
And again, the idea of directionality in the keys. Whatever is behind you, of course, is time in the past. When John was on the Isle of Patmos, he heard the voice from behind. That is to say, coming from the past, so to speak, speaking with him. And he turned to look around. The directionality is important because now he's looking back over the church age, right? So this is in metaphorical space. He's seeing things in retrospect. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of important cues that you pick up on as you go along, that together they add up to something which is entirely coherent and entirely translate from one scripture to the next. And if you're going through all these apocryphal or whatever lost books or whatever, and you keep seeing those same things in there, like I see it in the Gospel of Thomas, I see it in the Gospel of Truth, I see it in the Odes of Solomon, I see it in the Gospel of Philip, I see it in all these books. I see it like you see it. You see it in the Descensus and Nicodemus, and you see it in the Testament of Job, and you see it in all these different books because it's there. It's a literary feature that exists, and to the untrained eye, to the untrained ear, to the non-spiritual eye, to the non-spiritual ear, what are we doing? We're saying, okay, like when we go to look at these books, the natural eye wants to say, oh, this is written in such and such an age and by such and such a people, and it's probably a composite work, or it was probably written like in the 3rd century BC or whatever. It's this whole separate it's a whole separate kind of logic from someone who's saying, because again, you have to see this as a child. A child isn't trying to contextualize all of this in terms of history and in terms of graphology or whatever. They're not trying to pin it down to some time and place and put a nice, neat little bow on it and say, okay, I got it figured out. You know what I'm saying? That that's not it. And when you see what it is, right, then you recognize there's this whole other logic that does get you what you need. That does get you where you're going. You don't ask yourself those questions.
And there's a piece to it, and it just flows. It's not hard. It's just easy. It's so easy. I'm not gonna say anything bad about myself, but I had like a 2.4 GPA in high school. I did terrible. I couldn't remember a memory verse. I was not the smartest, person in my class. And, I cannot stop thinking about this stuff all the time. It just stays with you. It's powerful. You know what I'm saying? And it's simple. It just flows. It really does.
Well, and it's real. That's the thing. I hate to keep beating this dead horse, but it's real. Well, it's a live horse, really, to me. But the way in which the tree of life, of good and evil, whatever, the way in which all of these things can be the same is because there's an ambiguity. There's a way of understanding that leads you through the kingdom of death, the shadow of death, the valley of the shadow of death. The idea is that it's metaphorical space, right? That life is knowing the scriptures, that having spiritual life is knowing the spiritual meaning, going from fleshly eyes to spiritual eyes, right? Going from fleshly hearing to spiritual hearing, from being able to only articulate what you've been taught or what goes through your mind or whatever your opinions are, to being able to expound parables or being able to reveal things that are true. Like I don't consider myself to be a prophet, but I might as well be. I guess that's the way I reconcile it in my mind. I don't consider myself to be anything great, but I might as well be, because the thing is, what was put into my hand is great, and what I was given to give to you is great. You know what I'm saying? So whatever you think of me, it's independent of what that is.
Yeah, but God didn't give these things to Diotrephes. He gave them to John. That's the point. You know what I mean? And there's plenty of Diotrephes out there, and you're not one of them. So obviously he picked a John. So it's good.
And again, for those of you who don't know, Diotrephes was a person who, can you imagine being in a church leader, and not actually allowing John the evangelist, not even allowing John the apostle, the disciple whom Jesus loved,
who took
into
Mary
your assembly? Into your assembly. This is what First John teaches us, is that there were churches when John was still alive. And this may have been part of the reason why he was spared. Not only because he was the last one, the one to live the longest, as a concomitant with the fact that he's there until, quote unquote, he returns. Right. The idea that it follows that pattern anyway, it makes sense that he would be spared. But the idea was that so that you would know that in his age, that he was not accepted in his own church, that this cat named Diotrephes was in his church and would not have him speak to those people. And sometime subsequent to that, he ends up in Patmos. For all we know, Diotrephes might have been the one to turn him in. You know what I'm saying? That's a wild guess, but it's not inconsistent. Him or someone like him. The idea is that these people were not welcome, right? So the overthrowing of this mystery happened while the disciples were still alive, and one that we know of for sure. So the idea is that there was heresy that literally did not accept the apostles themselves during the life of one of the apostles that we know.
And that even of itself is a metaphor too, because if you realize that Peter represents the church and that the church denies Christ 3 times over the course of the age, which is the 2,000 years or the 2,000 pigs or whatever, and the demons cast into the 2,000 years, you look at it, you just go look it up. Go look up when the Gospel of Nicodemus, I'm not saying you, Robert, but I'm saying like anybody, go look up when was the Gospel of Nicodemus rejected. It was right around the 1600s, when at the same time Martin Luther was doing all this stuff, rejecting the Catholic books that they had, because like I said, it's like Lord of the Rings, where each part is given to a different denomination. So everybody has a piece, but everybody argues over their piece. So and then who's at the top? The devil is, with all the, because he knows the scripture better than all of us, honestly, and he knows what he has to do. And Jesus said, even like he said to Judas, go do what you're going to do quickly. You know what I'm saying? Go do it quick, because you're only going to get this amount of time. And if you read the Ascension of Isaiah, and you read the Gospel of Nicodemus, you realize Jesus transformed himself into lesser lights, because if you go down in levels, the angels are brighter as you go up. So as he comes down, he makes himself look like the different angels because God told him to. You find out God told him to do that. So he disguises himself as he comes down. When he gets to the layers where the demons are, they don't even notice him because they're arguing about stuff like the Kardashians and stuff like that. They're arguing about stupid things. Then you find out, who the 2 witnesses are. When you go down to the underworld, you find out that Enoch and Elijah, they self-identify as the people that will fight the Antichrist at the end of time. We should probably want to know that stuff, since we're going to be dealing with that pretty soon. If you believe that 1948 was the start of the fig tree generation, and right around 1948 is when Roswell happened and all these fallen angel appearances and things like that. So it goes around on itself. You have Jesus tried in different tribunals in the middle of the night, and that represents this age of darkness. And they take he is the word of God, and they take his pieces of the word of God and make false accusations against him. That's what it said would happen.
But all of this is a reward. We've been, like I said, I keep repeating myself, but it's important to remember that the world may be going to hell, so to speak. There are it's going the way that it has to go. It's like something that runs its course, like a sickness that runs its course, or anything else that ends in its own death. Error cannot help but err. Falsehood cannot help but be false. Weakness cannot help but be weak. Its strength is in our ignorance. Its strength lies in us not knowing.
Right, but right there, Robert. No, right there is what you said. The weakness, that verse, the weakness of God, which I think is in Psalms, the weakness of God is greater than man's strength, or whatever it says. It's talking about the wisdom of Solomon, because he's telling you they removed the wisdom of Solomon, and they're referring to that book as God's weakness, because God doesn't have weakness. So what the heck is he talking about? It's telling you, go look at these other books. It's always pointing you to the books they removed, which fulfills Matthew 13:33, the 3 testaments.
Right. And for those of you who like the armor of God, you go back, and that's Paul referring to the wisdom of Solomon as well. He's borrowing that imagery from the wisdom of Solomon. So he's quoting, or he's alluding to something that's very much in an extra biblical writing, or extra canonical writing, I should say. And in Hebrews, it's the same thing. There are allusions to Second Maccabees in the book of Hebrews, and in chapter 11 too, mind you, because I don't believe in accidents. Here it is, the chapter of faith, and you're going to go through the chapter of faith, and you're going to ignore an allusion to the second book of Maccabees, and you're going to ignore a direct allusion to the martyrdom of Isaiah.
Yep.
Right. All in the chapter of faith. Right. I think that's for a reason, because here it is, faith is this, faith is this, faith is this, and you're gonna go all the way through the chapter of faith, and you're gonna deny two direct sources that lie outside of your canon, because they lie outside of your canon. That's the power of idolatry, because spiritual idolatry, that is to say, to the fleshly level understanding and to the teachings of men, where you're letting men be true and God a liar,
Yep.
right? And that right there is basically the unpardonable sin, because that's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit to say that the Spirit is lying in the face of men. So that is, that's an uncomfortable teaching. But the idea is that these people who knew the truth, and this is a caveat here, like even in Revelation, it says, for those of you who understand the words of this prophecy, or who see the words of this prophecy, or hear the words of this prophecy, right? For you to then add to it, right? Then you're adding these plagues upon yourself, right? The idea is that you have to have conscious awareness of what you're doing in order for this to be final and terminal. And for people who do it out of ignorance, again, they don't hear the words of this prophecy, not spiritually. So they're less to be blamed. So there is a whole world of people who
Judas betrayed and Peter denied. It's two separate things.
Yeah, it's a Peter was unaware. It's like they actually put in there, when he thought about it, then he went out and wept, right? Whereas Judas knew beforehand what he wanted to do and only regretted it after the fact, right?
Yep.
And his killing of himself, again, this is all metaphorical space here. Judas represents those people who consciously knew where the Logos was and betrayed it to the secular authorities. And the secularism has creeped its way into religion and true religion, and Judaism, which again was the Judaism of old, which was also based on a canon. That was the synagogue of Satan. That is to say, there's the true Jew, and then there's the synagogue of Satan. The ones who say that there is a fixed number of books because we say we are the authorities, and we say which books matter and which books don't matter, because it's all based on what we say. Right? We're the ones who drew this box and said, these books are in, those books are out. You read this, don't read that. In fact, we don't even want these books to exist anymore. We don't want these ideas to exist anymore. We're going to burn these things. We're going to anathematize these things. Okay. These are the kinds of things where consciously, and why do you think that they were so afraid of the martyrs? Do you think it's because they love Jesus so much? They love the truth so much. The truth was so in their hearts that they had to kill people. You know what I'm saying? They went after people who knew the truth so that the truth could not be taught, because the truth was they were able to exposit these things in the Old Testament to speak of the coming of Jesus, for one thing, right? So they were shifting people's paradigms away from Judaism or the synagogue of Satan into the true understanding, which is to say that in the ways in which the Father spoke about the Son in the Old Testament, let's say, right? The idea that there was a New Testament that was engendered, if you will, out of the Old Testament prophecies, that he came under his own authority because it was all about him. Like they talked about on the road to Emmaus, that all these scriptures were about him. Their hearts were burning inside of them because they understood the truth of what he was saying about himself, right? Without them knowing that it was him, right? And then there at the end, he's like, oh yeah, and then he disappears, and then they're like, oh wow, that was him. They realized it after the fact. But the idea was that the Old Testament, or the prophecies, or the spirit behind it, however you want to look at it, engenders another testament. And then Jesus, who was our Lord, speaks of things to come. There's a third revelation coming. And that's what this third revelation is. It speaks in Thomas, have you understood the beginning then, that you seek the end? Because the end is going to be at the beginning. So you go back to what these people understood at first. And that's another thing that the super gospel is basically good for, because it puts you in touch with what these people understood at first. It brings you closer to what people believed from the beginning, right? But the mystery was what was truly known at the beginning. And the mystery was what was truly what needed to be destroyed in order for the falsehood to take this time of 2,000 years and run its course, to give the devil time to set up Babylon, and that's this world. This world is that beast, that institution that, again, it's all metaphorical space. the Babylon is going to fall at some point is due to the fact that what it's built on is a lie. And what it's built on is deception. And what it's run by is fallen people, people who knew and to this day know the truth. And again, I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but people probably pick up what I'm saying. When you see upside down crosses, and when you see pedophilia images, and when you see those kinds of things, right?
Yep.
When you see occultic stuff, it isn't just because it's cool or they're trying to be, edgy or whatever. It's because they really are evil and satanic. There really are people out there who knew the truth, who subverted the truth. Just like they were able to kill somebody who was transitioning into their angelic state. And Paul was one of these people, right? All the people who turned against Jesus, right? All the people who were one day, they were like, Hosanna to the king, oh, whatever. And then it turned out that he wasn't going to do what they wanted him to do. And all of a sudden they turned against him. They're like, you know what? Crucify him, right?
Yep.
And who did they accept? Barabbas, right? Barabbas means son of the Father. He's a symbol of the Antichrist. They wanted the false teaching. See, there's Christ and there's Antichrist. And Christ is the heavenly level meaning, right? It even says this again. I've got it on my head because I've been reading it, but in the Gospel of Philip, it talks like that. Jesus is a concealed name. Christ is a revealed name, right? When you say Jesus Christ, you're going from that which is concealed to that which is revealed. This is why you can have our Lord Jesus Christ, because that's the three revelations, right? The idea that you have Christ Jesus refers to the man. And even Paul uses this syntax. He talks about the man Christ Jesus. He doesn't talk about the man Jesus Christ, because he's coming from the heavenly down to the earthly in that sense. And when he was circumcised, they called his name Jesus, right? The idea is that the Jesus is the hidden name, and the Christ is the revealed name. So there is the hidden and there is the revealed in the word. And so it just depends on that all that stuff. I've got all kinds of explanations. I've gone through and I've done expositions of every one of Paul's books, with the exception of Hebrews. I haven't done that one yet, but they're
Robert,
all in my Understanding Paul series. Yeah.
before we go, I just wanted to tell everybody, I don't know if they know this or not, but they probably do, your listeners and mine, but on Robert's website, there's a whole PDF about the keys of the kingdom. He goes, all the things we talked about, the dogs, the east, west, north, and south, having to do with the past, the future, the heavenly kingdom, the earthly kingdom, the dogs, the pigs, all the stuff we mentioned as keys are on his website. It's not obviously all of the keys, because you discover more as you go. But
I probably need to update that, but yeah, I mean, it's all kind of up here, right? I need to put it out there, but yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress. But yeah, for those of you, again, this is a guy named Rick Simpson. His YouTube handle is Jesus Love 723, and like I said, he does this on his own dime. So if you want to show him a little bit of love or whatever, that's where he's at. But he's created a website for all of this stuff, so there's a ton of resources over there.
Any money you donate goes to the website. It's on the top right hand corner if you want to donate to the website, and do it often enough that hopefully it helps him out. And then also, if you want to donate to Robert Farrell, he has a Patreon that you can donate to as well. So if anybody wants to help out, please feel free to do that, because everybody has to pay their bills out there, and doing this actually does take a lot of time out of your life. So if you can help out, it helps the kingdom. So I just want to say that.
But I would rather people worry about themselves and other people, because the real meat of this is to get to this endpoint where we literally create a new beginning, where it really is a gospel. I mean, listen, I don't mean to sound grandiose, because there's hardly a way to talk about something like this without sounding grandiose. This is why I try to speak beyond myself. This is all of us. Okay. Moses, in a sense, brought us a testament. Jesus and the apostles, in a sense, brought us a testament. And they've made it possible for us to bring another testament to the world, and another testimony, and another witness. Okay, there was the testament of the Father. That is to say, he spoke about the Son. And if you really break it down, there's a trifold aspect. The Ark of the Covenant, he speaks about three things in the Ark. There are going to be three covenants. There's going to be three revelations. And again, the idea is that there is the teaching of the Father, there is the teaching of the Son, right? That's the Old and the New Testaments, basically. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work, right? So again, the past, the present, right? And then he talks about the Comforter that is going to come. He talks about the Elijah, which is to come, right? To set all things straight, to teach, to lead us into all truth. This is a future thing. Well, the future is now. What I'm saying is,
Right.
if you hear it and you have spiritual ears, you know that it's true because you hear it. If you see it and you've gotten those spiritual eyes, then you know that it's true because you see it, right? So the idea is to get people seeing this, right? And you can use my
Robert,
resources, you can pass it around however you want to. The point is to shout it from the rooftops and get people to see it.
if I could just say one thing to add to that is that so Ron Wyatt supposedly found the Ark of the Covenant underneath where Jesus was crucified, and he's not allowed to open it until the Antichrist is revealed. So once that happens, you're going to find out that the tables of the law, which represents God's testament, is in the Ark of the Covenant. The showbread, the manna, which is Jesus, the bread of life, is in there. And then there's the staff that budded. The staff that budded, if you read the book I'm reading right now, and you also read Robert Farrell's work, the staff that budded was what Joseph had to find out that he was gonna take Mary on to be his, betrothed to have Jesus as their son. So that staff that budded represents like basically the priesthood that all of a sudden came out of nowhere because it budded from not basically it just came, overnight. It just budded. That's overnight is metaphoric as well. So these three things represent all words. So God the Father had the law, then Jesus, his son, had his thing, which he was the word. And then the third is the books that they removed, because only spiritually can you discern if they're supposed to be, read, basically.
Yeah, the hidden manna, that's a future reference. It talks about in Revelation, to him that overcomes. And what are you overcoming? You're overcoming the illusion, the idols, if you will, of the present age, or the age that's passing away, right? And then you're given to eat of the hidden manna, which is the hidden word, right? These are these hidden books. This is the hidden mysteries, the hidden things that are concealed. And then the rod, again, the budding, the rod is the cane or the cannon or whatever. When you start seeing the fruits that are being brought forth, the fruitage of it, right? That's what this is. You're able to bring forth the fruits and stuff from it. But the idea is that, that there are three symbolic items, meaning there are three covenants given to man.
Oh my gosh, Robert, I just had an epiphany while we're talking right now because I'm reading this book. Interestingly enough, if the rod represents the Holy Spirit's testament, it's interesting because these books have been with us since the beginning, like it says in Jude, since Enoch's time. These books passed through the ark, Noah's ark, to come over to this world. So, the staff is said to have come from paradise, and it was given to Adam, and it passed down through all the patriarchs, and it became Moses's staff, which he split the Reed Sea with, for the Israel to escape, go through the Reed Sea or whatever. So, in essence, if the staff is the staff that budded and it came all the way from the beginning, that does match up metaphorically to all the books that were removed have come all the way from Enoch, and it progressively, comes to us now too. It's just interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the in terms of the metaphorical sense, the idea is that we have a canon, and that the canon itself is what that rod represents. It flourishes, it produces flowers and buds and fruit, in the same way that your understanding of the canon or whatever also produces fruit. But anyway, the idea is that there's these three things in the Ark of the Covenant. Well, there's going to be three revelations, and that's been from the beginning.
Right.
And that we will be given to eat of the hidden manna, right, as a function of us overcoming that. Because what stands in the way of it keeps us from what's hidden, and it keeps us from that food, right? But getting that out of the way, in other words, overcoming the idol, if you will, of the 2,000 years of false teaching, it overcoming that gives us the right to eat of these things, where we get a new stone, a white stone, a New Testament, in other words,
the two things that match that
no one understands.
The two things that match that are what you're talking about is like the 6 jars that Jesus turned into wine that he saved for the end of the wedding, and then Abraham's 6 sons from Keturah, which Paul only mentions briefly. It's something that's almost never mentioned, just like the books are barely ever mentioned. But the 6 sons and the 6 jars that turn in from water to wine. And Jesus said you have to empty out the old wineskins and prepare yourself, like use new wineskins to prepare yourself for that new understanding. That's something I had to do as a Christian because I wasn't prepared to accept these new things until I emptied out the old things. You have to unlearn it to learn the new thing, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, what's great about it is, like I said, just seeing it, all of this stuff just passes almost instantaneously. It's
Right.
like you make a good clean break from the past and you realize, and not that there aren't useful resources, not that there aren't things that you can use from it, but the whole teaching is gone. The
Right.
whole everything is gone. And so you become new just from knowing this.
Well, I think we're at like 2 hours and 30 minutes, and I know today's an important day for you. So if you want to go, I don't want to keep you on a special day for yourself.
Okay, well, it's been a great talk, and like I said, I think hopefully we can open up people's eyes and ears. Hopefully that based on the times that we're in, more and more people are going to be looking for answers and looking for truth than were before, and
Right.
hopefully that will provide a catalyst for us to move forward. 'Cause I've been talking the same thing. Anybody who goes after my old stuff, I've been talking the same thing since I hit YouTube back in 2007, I think it was. You know what I'm saying? And I've gotten a decent amount of attraction, but this really needs to move forward out into the world. You know what I'm saying? So I think we all need to do our part to push this out there and make this happen. It talks about our works, it talks about the fruits of our labors, it talks about the deeds and whatnot that we do, and that's all of us. It's always in the plural, it's never in the singular. It's always about all of us, the children, the elect, the multitudes. It's about all of us. So start to see yourself as that fourth piece of the puzzle, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and their adoption of us as children.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Robert. I hope, I know you're super busy all the time, but if want to do a second show, just follow up show or something like that, I'd be happy. Love to do that with you if possible.
Yeah, always pleased to talk with like-minded people.
Well, thank you, Robert. I hope you have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Take care.